I stood alone at the plaintiff's desk in the grand marble courtroom of the Illinois Superior Court. 10 feet away, my husband, Nathan, and his 26-year-old mistress, Chloe, were openly laughing at my cheap gray suit. Nathan leaned against the polished mahogany table, adjusting his silk tie. "You cannot even afford a real lawyer. Ruby," he sneered, "this is genuinely pathetic." Beside him, his high-priced attorney smirked and casually asked the judge for an immediate default judgment to strip me of my marital assets. The men in the room looked at me with undisguised contempt, convinced I was defeated. I did not cry, and I did not argue. My name is Ruby, and I am 34 years old. I simply opened a single black manila folder, rested my hands flat on the wood, and looked directly up at the bench. The heavy silence was shattered when the judge leaned forward, bypassing the defense's motion. He turned a deadpan, terrifying glare toward my husband's arrogant lawyer. "Counselor," the judge said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, "do you seriously not recognize her?" The color vanished from my husband's face. Before I explain exactly how I orchestrated the most devastating financial execution in Chicago history, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe arrogant narcissists always build their own cages. The cold marble of our kitchen island chilled my palms as I stared at the joint bank statement glowing on my laptop screen. The morning sunlight slanted through the plantation shutters, casting long, geometric shadows across the pristine hardwood floor. But I did not feel the warmth. My eyes remained locked on a single devastating line of red text near the top of the digital ledger. Exactly $1.2 million had vanished in a single wire transfer processed at 2 a.m. My jaw tightened, the muscles clicking faintly in the silent room. This specific checking account was a carefully constructed decoy. It held a fraction of my actual wealth, designed exclusively to maintain the illusion of my fabricated middle-class salary. For 5 years, I had played the role of a mid-tier freelance legal researcher, bearing my true identity as the senior managing partner of Vanguard Holdings beneath a mountain of modest sweaters and sensible shoes. I had built that facade to protect my marriage from the toxic, hyper-competitive ego I always suspected lurked beneath my husband's charming exterior. The sound of heavy, confident footsteps echoed down the hallway. Nathan strolled into the kitchen. Entirely oblivious to the digital execution order resting on the screen, he wore a crisp, tailored navy suit, his hair perfectly styled. The scent of his expensive sandalwood cologne immediately filled the space, thick and suffocating. He walked straight past me, heading directly for the stainless steel espresso machine. He did not offer a greeting. He did not ask how I slept. He simply picked up a ceramic mug and pressed a button, watching the dark liquid pour. "Did you authorize an overnight wire transfer?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat. Nathan did not even look up from the machine. He reached up, casually adjusting the knot of his expensive silk tie. "I moved it into the startup," he answered without looking up. My fingers remained perfectly still on the smooth trackpad of the laptop. I watched the reflection of his face in the polished surface of the microwave door. His expression was completely relaxed, devoid of any guilt or hesitation. "You emptied the entire primary account," I stated, watching his hands. He picked up his coffee mug, took a slow sip, and finally turned to face me. A patronizing, incredibly condescending smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "It is called venture capital, Ruby," he scoffed, adjusting his collar. "That was $1.2 million, I replied, forcing my breathing to remain slow and steady. "The tech logistics market moves incredibly fast," he said smoothly. He walked around the island, stepping into my personal space. He leaned against the marble counter, crossing his ankles in a posture of absolute, unearned dominance. Nexus Logistics was his supposed masterpiece, a tech startup currently boasting a $15 million valuation built entirely on aggressive marketing and smoke. We never discussed an angel investment, I noted, my eyes locking onto his. Nathan rolled his eyes, letting out a sharp, theatrical sigh of exhaustion. He set his mug down on the counter with a dull thud. "Because you do not understand corporate finance," he replied, pouring his coffee. He reached out, attempting to pat my shoulder in a gesture of manufactured sympathy. I shifted my weight back exactly 1 inch, causing his hand to swipe through empty air. He dropped his arm, his smirk hardening into a scowl. "I am securing a massive bridge round," Nathan continued, his tone dripping with venomous arrogance. "We did not agree to this," I countered, keeping my spine perfectly rigid. "A freelance paralegal cannot comprehend equity stakes," he mocked, grabbing his briefcase. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his ringing phone. He glanced at the screen, and a genuine, eager smile instantly replaced his manufactured annoyance. I knew exactly who was calling: Chloe, his 26-year-old vice president of marketing, the woman who had been leaving subtle traces of her expensive perfume on his suit jackets for the past 6 months. Nathan turned toward the foyer, fully prepared to walk out the door. "That is our shared marital asset," I said softly, delivering the final test. Nathan stopped in the doorway. He slowly turned back around, looking at me with a gaze so full of raw, unfiltered contempt that it chilled the blood in my veins. He looked at my simple gray cardigan, at the modest kitchen I had purchased, and finally, at the laptop screen. "You simply cannot afford a seat at this table, Ruby," he mocked, walking out the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the brass deadbolt clicking into place with a sharp, definitive crack. I did not scream. I did not hurl his ceramic coffee mug against the backsplash, and I did not collapse onto the hardwood floor in a puddle of betrayed tears. The heavy silence of the empty house wrapped around me, cold and absolute. I sat at the marble island, feeling a profound, fundamental shift occurring deep within my chest. The warm, naive wife who had spent half a decade shrinking herself to protect a fragile man's ego died in that exact moment. The illusion was permanently severed. I reached up, pulling the elastic band from my hair, letting it fall sharply around my shoulders. I cracked my knuckles, the sharp popping sounds echoing in the quiet kitchen. The senior managing partner of Vanguard Holdings resurrected. I turned my attention back to the glowing screen of my laptop. The standard consumer banking portal was entirely insufficient for the financial autopsy I was about to perform. I closed the browser, opened my encrypted terminal, and entered a 40-character alphanumeric sequence to bypass the domestic firewalls. The screen flickered, transitioning from the soft white interface of retail banking into the stark, black and green command line of Vanguard's proprietary forensic tracking software. I was no longer looking at a simple bank statement. I was looking at raw, unencrypted routing data. I isolated the transaction hash for the missing $1.2 million. Nathan believed that digital banking operated like a black box, assuming that once the money left the account, it was completely untraceable to a civilian eye. He fundamentally failed to realize that I commanded an international private equity empire capable of liquidating sovereign assets before breakfast. I typed a rapid sequence of commands, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with practiced, lethal precision. I traced the specific Swift codes embedded in his overnight wire transfer. The numerical data cascaded down my high-resolution screen in a mesmerizing, rapid waterfall of green text. The funds had not gone directly to the corporate operating accounts of Nexus Logistics, if he were executing a legitimate angel investment for his startup. The money would have routed straight to his primary business ledger. Instead, the data revealed a highly aggressive, deeply suspicious detour. The $1.2 million had bounced to a clearinghouse in New York before landing securely in the accounts of a corporate entity registered in Delaware. The entity was named Horizon Logistics Holdings. My eyes narrowed, scanning the registration data pulled directly from the Delaware Division of Corporations database. Horizon Logistics Holdings was an off-the-shelf shell company, Incorporated exactly 14 days ago. It had no employees, no physical warehouse space, no board of directors, and absolutely no legitimate operating history. It was a phantom vehicle constructed entirely out of cheap legal paperwork and a registered agent operating out of a strip mall postal box located in a suburban commercial zone. Nathan had not invested our marital assets into his struggling tech startup. He had maliciously funneled the money through a fraudulent shell company to wash the capital. Completely separating it from my name, he was actively stripping the marriage of its liquidity, hiding the cash in an untraceable domestic trust while preparing to abandon his supposedly penniless wife. He was siphoning the resources he thought he controlled to fund a new, lavish life with his young mistress. I leaned back in the ergonomic kitchen stool, tapping my index finger against the cool marble counter. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of his financial maneuvering was almost comical. He had executed the kind of amateur, sloppy wire fraud that my junior analysts at Vanguard routinely dismantled during their lunch breaks. He had left a massive, glowing digital footprint spread across state lines, elevating a standard domestic dispute into a highly documented federal financial crime. Nathan truly believed he was the smartest man in Chicago. He thought he was playing a brilliant, high-stakes game of corporate chess against a woman who barely understood how the board was set. He had absolutely no idea that I owned the board, the pieces, and the entire building we were sitting in. I systematically downloaded the complete metadata file from the Delaware Corporate Registry. I saved the routing nodes, the time-stamped transfer receipts, and the IP address logs originating from our home router, dropping them into a newly created, highly encrypted digital dossier on my desktop. I named the file with a single keystroke. I stared at the blinking cursor, feeling a cold, predatory satisfaction settle over me. A crumbling foundation always looks perfect from the outside, and Nathan had just handed me the blueprints to his destruction. I closed the lid of my laptop, cutting off the glow of the encrypted dossier. I spent the next 36 hours executing my routine with mechanical precision. I brewed his coffee. I ironed his shirts. I walked out the front door the following morning wearing my sensible flats, carrying my canvas tote bag, playing the part of the oblivious paralegal heading to a mediocre cubicle. I gave him the satisfaction of believing his secret remained safely buried. The crisp Chicago wind bit at my face when I returned to the estate the following evening. I climbed the stone steps, retrieving the brass key from my pocket. I slid the metal into the heavy oak deadbolt and pushed. The key jammed. I pulled it back, realigned the grooves, and applied steady pressure. The internal tumblers refused to turn. The cylinder had been replaced. My eyes drifted downward. A thick manila envelope was secured to the center of the door with a single strip of industrial tape. The gold-embossed crest of Kensington and Associates pressed through the heavy paper. I peeled the tape away, the adhesive tearing with a sharp hiss. I broke the wax seal, pulling a stack of premium legal parchment into the fading evening light. The bold typography detailed an expedited petition for divorce. My eyes scanned the clauses, bypassing the standard legal posturing to locate the financial execution. Marcus had drafted a ruthless settlement, stripping me of the vehicles, the retirement accounts, and the equity in the marital home. He even included a clause demanding I cover his exorbitant attorney fees, assuming I would be too frightened to challenge the mandate. Nathan demanded I surrender all claims to our marital assets within 14 days. He cited irreconcilable differences, claiming I had drained the marriage of its financial viability through reckless spending. A small, printed note from his attorney, Marcus, was clipped to the final page. Your primary checking account is currently frozen. The note read in stark black ink. Sign the surrender forms immediately to avoid severe financial hardship. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled the device out and opened my retail banking application. A stark red banner spanned the top of the screen, confirming the account lock. Nathan had timed the strike perfectly. He emptied the $1.2 million, changed the locks, and weaponized a high-priced attorney to freeze my remaining domestic funds in a single sweep. He assumed the sudden lack of liquidity would shatter my spirit. I looked at my cheap gray Honda parked at the edge of the circular driveway. Nathan expected me to retreat to the driver's seat. He wanted me to curl into a shivering ball on the fabric upholstery, terrified of the Chicago cold. He anticipated a desperate, weeping voicemail begging him for access to the house. I slid the legal documents back into the envelope. I did not walk toward the Honda, and I did not dial his number. I turned my back on the sprawling stone estate, walking briskly down the long, paved driveway toward the main avenue. I stood on the corner and raised my hand. A passing yellow taxi pulled to the curb, the brakes squeaking against the cold asphalt. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Just drive west," I instructed quietly, pulling the door shut. We merged onto the highway, leaving the affluent suburbs behind. The towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Chicago faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the industrial outskirts of the city. Chain-link fences, abandoned lots, and concrete warehouses blurred past the rain-streaked window. I directed the driver to a modest, anonymous motel tucked behind a commercial trucking route. I paid the fare using a prepaid corporate expense card I kept hidden in the lining of my coat, ensuring the transaction would never appear on a domestic ledger. I stood in the cramped lobby, exchanging a $100 bill for a physical brass key. The desk clerk did not look up from his magazine. The room was strikingly bare, the wallpaper peeled at the corners, revealing gray plaster underneath. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting a sickly, pale light across the worn carpet and the stiff mattress. The heating unit in the corner hummed loudly, struggling to push warm air into the small space. The stark deprivation meant nothing to me. A frozen checking account was merely a mosquito bite against the impenetrable armor of Vanguard Holdings. I unbuttoned my trench coat, draping it over the back of a wooden chair. I set my canvas tote bag onto the scratched laminate desk and pulled out my laptop, the heavy battery clicking securely into place. I did not shed a single tear for the lost estate or the ruined marriage. I flipped the screen open, bypassing the domestic internet connection. I routed my signal through a series of encrypted proxies, burying my location deep within Vanguard's international server network. The screen transitioned to the secure, black and green command line. I pulled out my encrypted corporate phone and initiated a secure voice call. Elena operated in the shadows of the financial district, a brilliant tactician who moved billions of dollars across global markets without leaving a single fingerprint. She managed the hostile takeovers for Vanguard, acting as my proxy in the physical world while I maintained my unassuming facade. The line rang once before connecting. "The connection is secure and encrypted," Elena stated, her voice crisp and devoid of hesitation. "Nathan locked down the estate and froze the domestic accounts," I replied, tracing the edge of the legal envelope. "Do you require immediate physical extraction from that location?" Elena asked, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. "No, I am perfectly fine," I answered, shaking my head slightly at the peeling wallpaper. "We are moving to the offensive tonight." I opened a secondary window, pulling up the digital dossier I had compiled at the kitchen island. I dragged the file containing Nathan's wire fraud, the Delaware Shell Company routing numbers, and the $1.2 million theft into the encrypted transfer portal. "Review these incoming transaction hashes from the Delaware wire," I commanded, watching the upload progress bar fill. A heavy silence stretched over the encrypted line for several seconds. I listened to the faint hum of the motel heating unit, waiting for her sharp analytical mind to process the raw data. "He moved the capital through a dummy holding company," Elena observed, her tone shifting to pure operational efficiency. "He believes he hid the money from me," I stated, my fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "He intends to use it to float his startup." "What are your specific parameters for this operation?" Elena inquired, waiting for the execution order. "I need a deep dive forensic audit," I instructed, my eyes scanning the dark monitor. Look directly into the capitalization table for Nexus Logistics. I will deploy the senior analysts to the task immediately, Elena confirmed, her keyboard clacking rapidly. I want to know exactly who holds the financial leverage, I added, staring at the glowing screen. We will map every single debt covenant on their books, Elena responded, her voice steady and professional. He needs a massive bridge loan to survive, I noted, recalling the frantic pacing Nathan had exhibited over the past month. Nexus Logistics is burning cash. If he seeks emergency capital, his terms will be exposed, Elena pointed out. Find out exactly who he is courting for the capital injection, I ordered, leaning closer to the microphone. I will isolate the specific brokers handling his lending file, Elena replied, anticipating the strategy. Keep the domestic veil intact during the search, I warned, pressing my lips into a thin line. He cannot know Vanguard is looking at his books. Apex Capital is primed for deployment in the shadow market, Elena assured me, referencing our subsidiary. Use Apex Capital for all initial lending inquiries, I finalized, reaching to sever the connection. It will be handled by tomorrow morning, Elena said, disconnecting the line. The motel room fell silent again, the cold draft leaking through the poorly sealed window pane. I stood up, walking over to the noisy heating unit, and pressed my hands against the warm metal grate. Nathan had orchestrated a seemingly flawless domestic execution. He had locked the doors to the house I restored. He had frozen the bank account holding my fabricated salary. He had weaponized an expensive lawyer to intimidate me into signing away my rights to my own stolen money. He genuinely thought he had stripped me of all my resources. He assumed his biggest problem was a weeping, hysterical wife, sleeping in a cheap Honda. He sat in his corner office, surrounded by glass and steel, unaware that I was currently picking the digital locks to his entire corporate existence. The legal envelope resting on the laminate desk was not an eviction notice, it was a formal declaration of war. And I was bringing a billion-dollar private equity firm to the battlefield. I opened the manila folder and placed the divorce papers inside, ready to build the case that would bury them all. The thin curtains of the motel room did little to block the harsh morning sunlight. I sat at the scratched laminate desk, my fingers resting lightly over the keyboard, listening to the loud, mechanical rattle of the heating unit. A sharp, brief vibration buzzed against the wood. My smartphone screen lit up, displaying a standard social media notification. I tapped the glass. The application opened, pulling up a public profile belonging to Chloe, the 26-year-old vice president of marketing for Nexus Logistics. The image rendered in high definition. Chloe posed near the polished wooden railing of a luxury yacht, the steel-gray waters of Lake Michigan stretching out behind her. She held a crystal flute of vintage champagne. Her head tilted back in a manufactured laugh. The wind whipped her blonde hair across her shoulders. My eyes bypassed her designer sunglasses and locked onto her chest, resting heavily against her collarbone. Catching the morning glare was my grandmother's vintage diamond necklace. The platinum setting featured a distinct, cascading teardrop arrangement. It was a flawless, custom piece of jewelry forged in the 1920s. Nathan had sworn he placed that necklace in a secure, climate-controlled bank vault downtown 6 months ago, claiming our home safe was insufficient for an heirloom of that caliber. My jaw tightened, the muscles ticking beneath my skin. I ground my back teeth together, feeling the dull ache radiate up to my temples. I stared at the stolen diamonds resting against the skin of the woman sleeping with my husband. I did not type an angry comment under the photograph. I did not hurl my phone across the small motel room. I did not dial the local police precinct to report a petty domestic theft. Silence isn't a sign of weakness. It is a loaded weapon. I picked up my encrypted corporate device. I pressed the single speed dial key. The secure line is active, Elena stated, her voice sharp and alert. I need access to the primary insurance database, I instructed, keeping my tone perfectly flat. Routing your terminal through the underwriter gateway, she replied, the sound of keystrokes echoing faintly. Nathan lied about a specific domestic asset, I explained, my eyes fixed on Chloe's photograph. Specify the target asset, Elena requested, pausing her typing. A vintage teardrop diamond necklace, I said, tapping the trackpad. Running the appraisal registry now, she noted. I watched the terminal screen shift from the standard Vanguard interface to a highly restricted, read-only database utilized by international insurance conglomerates to track high-value asset claims. I typed the original policy identification number into the search bar. Hitting the return key with a sharp, decisive tap, the database populated a dense, multi-page ledger. I scrolled past the initial appraisal records, stopping at an entry logged exactly 90 days ago. Nathan had filed a comprehensive loss claim. He submitted a fabricated police report stating the necklace was stolen from his vehicle during a downtown corporate event. The underwriter, lacking the forensic scrutiny of a private equity firm, processed the claim without requiring a secondary physical investigation. The ledger displayed a massive insurance payout. $250,000 had been issued to Nathan's private holding account. He had not just given my grandmother's heirloom to his mistress as a romantic gesture. He had weaponized the jewelry, executing a calculated high-yield insurance scam. I pulled up the routing data for the $250,000. The capital did not remain in Nathan's holding account. It moved 48 hours later, funneled through the same regional bank he used for his tech logistics startup. He filed a fraudulent loss claim, I stated, breaking the silence on the encrypted line. He defrauded the underwriter for $250,000, Elena observed, reading the mirrored data. Track the outbound wire transfer, I commanded, my fingers hovering over the keys. The capital bypassed the Nexus Logistics account, she reported, her voice tightening slightly. Where did it land? I asked, leaning closer to the glowing screen. A personal checking account belonging to Chloe, Elena confirmed, highlighting the destination node. My chest rose and fell in a slow, controlled rhythm. Nathan had taken a localized, petty domestic theft and arrogantly escalated it into a severe federal wire fraud conspiracy. By moving the fraudulent insurance payout across state banking lines into the personal account of a Nexus Logistics executive, he had contaminated his own corporate ecosystem. I minimized the database window and opened a specialized digital forensics application Vanguard used for corporate espionage defense. I dragged Chloe's social media photograph directly into the extraction portal. I initiated a deep scan on the image file, bypassing the superficial pixels to access the embedded exchangeable image file format data. The software stripped the photograph down to its raw, numerical core. The metadata cascaded across my screen, revealing the shutter speed, the aperture, the specific model of the expensive smartphone camera she used, and the unalterable global positioning coordinates. I highlighted the specific geolocation numbers stamped onto the digital file. The satellite positioning placed the yacht directly on Lake Michigan, 2 miles off the Chicago coastline. I checked the exact timestamp recorded by the camera sensor. The photograph was taken at 3:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling the cool metal of my wedding band against my skin. I cross-referenced that precise minute with the banking ledger. The $250,000 wire transfer cleared into Chloe's checking account at 3:14 in the afternoon on that exact same Tuesday. She was literally holding the glass of vintage champagne to celebrate the arrival of the stolen federal funds, wearing the physical evidence of the crime around her neck while posing for the internet. They had handed me the murder weapon, the motive, and the signed confession in a single, publicly accessible digital post. Chloe's vanity had entirely bypassed Nathan's corporate caution. Extract the metadata from that image, I ordered, tapping my fingernail against the desk. Pulling the geolocation and timestamp data now, Elena replied. Securing the network packet. Package it with the fraudulent insurance claim, I instructed, my eyes narrowing at Chloe's smiling face. The wire fraud dossier is compiling, she confirmed, a faint click signaling the folder creation. He tied the felony directly to a Nexus executive, I noted, my jaw relaxing slightly. They left a massive, undeniable digital footprint. Elena agreed, her tone reflecting cold satisfaction. Print the physical copies for the Manila folder, I finalized, reaching for the end call button. I will send them via secure courier, she said, terminating the connection. I closed the social media application, erasing Chloe's arrogant, champagne-soaked smile from my monitor. I opened the digital folder housing Nathan's various financial crimes. The rope was slowly, methodically wrapping around their necks, and they were the ones eagerly tying the knot. The peeling wallpaper of the motel room seemed to fade away, replaced by the sheer, calculating focus of a Vanguard boardroom. My husband believed his biggest vulnerability was a lack of venture capital for his logistics startup. He believed the Delaware Shell Company would protect his stolen $1.2 million. He assumed the insurance underwriter would never connect his mistress to the missing heirloom. He was operating under the delusion of invincibility, navigating a glass house while throwing heavy, jagged stones. Every single maneuver he executed to fund his new life provided me with a distinct, irrefutable federal charge. My phone vibrated a second time, disrupting the quiet hum of the motel heater. A standard text message appeared on the locked screen. It was from Nathan. I stared at the preview text. He was reminding me that the 14-day deadline on the divorce surrender forms was non-negotiable, demanding I sign the papers or face Marcus in a courtroom. He was attempting to apply psychological pressure, projecting the aggressive confidence of an untouchable CEO who held all the cards. I swiped the notification away, deleting the message without opening it. I did not need to engage with his petty threats. I needed to tighten the noose. Nexus Logistics was burning cash at an unsustainable rate. The stolen $1.2 million from our joint account was a temporary bandage on a gaping arterial wound. The $250,000 in wire fraud was diverted strictly to his mistress. If Nathan wanted his startup to survive the upcoming quarter, he required a massive legitimate capital injection. I reopened my encrypted terminal, pulling up the capitalization table Elena had audited the previous night. I scanned the list of prospective lenders Nathan was currently courting. He was actively avoiding traditional Chicago banking institutions, terrified their rigorous underwriting standards would expose his fraudulent accounting. He was looking for shadow capital. He wanted private equity money that asked very few questions and signed checks rapidly. I tapped my fingers against the laminate desk, staring at the name of our subsidiary holding company, Apex Capital. Apex operated as a silent, aggressive lending arm for Vanguard Holdings, specializing in predatory bridge loans for desperate tech founders. It was time to give my husband exactly what he wanted. It was time to fund his tech logistics startup with a rope so heavy it would drag his entire empire to the bottom of Lake Michigan. I reached for the thick, black manila folder resting on the edge of the desk, flipping it open to deposit the incoming wire fraud documents, preparing to draft a loan agreement that would ensure he never slept peacefully again. A sharp, high-pitched chime sliced through the steady drone of the motel room heating unit. A red notification badge pulsed in the upper right corner of my encrypted terminal, casting a crimson glow across my knuckles. I shifted my hand from the black manila folder to the trackpad, clicking the flashing icon. Elena bypassed the standard daily briefing protocol, initiating a Priority 1 secure voice channel. He submitted the emergency capital request, Elena stated, her voice projecting through the small laptop speakers. I leaned forward, the metal springs in the cheap motel chair groaning under my shifting weight. I opened the attached financial package. The preliminary documents painted a picture of a company in freefall. Nexus Logistics hemorrhaged liquidity at an unsustainable rate. The stolen $1.2 million had already vanished into outstanding vendor invoices, server hosting debts, and massive payroll deficits. I pulled up his accounts payable ledger. He owed 3 different logistics contractors over $800,000, and the remaining capital was barely enough to keep his warehouse lights on through the weekend. Nathan stared down the barrel of immediate corporate insolvency. He was a man drowning in the deep end, grasping at the first life preserver thrown his way, entirely blind to the anchor tied to the other end of the rope. "Specify the requested injection amount," I instructed, scanning the preliminary term sheet. "He is asking for $5 million, Elna replied, the sound of a turning page echoing over the encrypted line. Nathan courted Apex Capital, operating under the assumption that they were a faceless consortium of naive offshore investors seeking high-yield tech equity. He lacked the basic due diligence skills required to trace Apex Capital back to its parent holding company in Chicago. He walked directly into Vanguard's shadow lending division, begging for a lifeline from the exact firm he thought he could outsmart. I opened the standard bridge loan template our underwriters generated. The default terms offered a 60-month repayment schedule, holding the corporate entity liable for the debt. I highlighted the entire repayment schedule and struck the delete key. "I am rewriting the debt covenants," I noted, my fingers resting on the home row of the keyboard. "The underwriters await your specific parameters," Elena confirmed, her tone shifting to strict compliance. I began typing, structuring a financial snare designed to snap his neck. I did not want a standard return on investment. I wanted inescapable ownership of his entire existence. I bypassed the standard 60-month repayment window. Instead, I drafted a brutal, unyielding 10-day balloon payment clause. I structured the interest rate to compound daily at the maximum legal threshold allowed in the state of Illinois. He would receive the $5 million today, but the entire principal, plus the predatory interest penalties, would become due in exactly 10 days. Nathan needed cash to make payroll by Friday morning. He would see the immediate deposit and ignore the ticking clock attached to the capital. I scrolled down to the collateral requirements. I deleted the clause restricting liability to the corporate entity of Nexus Logistics. I typed a comprehensive cross-collateralization mandate. I pierced the corporate veil with a single keystroke, eliminating the legal boundary between his business and his personal wealth. "Tie the debt directly to his personal assets," I ordered, my eyes scanning the harsh legal jargon I was manifesting on the screen. "Including the domestic real estate portfolio," Elena asked, pausing her keystrokes. "Include the marital estate, the offshore trusts, and his equity shares," I answered, striking the enter key to lock the clause. If Nathan missed the 10-day balloon payment, Apex Capital secured the legal right to seize his startup, drain his personal bank accounts, and foreclose on the sprawling stone estate he had locked me out of. By piercing the corporate veil in the loan agreement, he was putting his entire life up as collateral for a short-term cash infusion he had zero mathematical ability to repay. "The revised contract is compiling now," Elena stated, transmitting the finalized document back to my terminal. I reviewed the 50-page digital contract. The lethal clauses were buried deep within Section 4, masked by dense, exhausting legal boilerplate. Arrogant men rarely read past the executive summary when they are desperate for cash. They see the zeros, and they sign the line. "Dispatch the agreement through the Apex portal," I commanded, sitting back in the creaking chair. "The document is live in his inbox," Elena reported, the connection static hissing for a fraction of a second. I opened the real-time tracking interface on my monitor. The proprietary Vanguard software monitored the exact moment the recipient opened the email, tracking their mouse movements, their scrolling speed, and the digital signature authentication process. The digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked forward, the white numbers glowing against the black interface. The status bar on the Apex Capital portal shifted from yellow to green. Nathan opened the document. I watched the page view metric update in real time. He spent 45 seconds on the executive summary, confirming the $5 million deposit amount. His cursor flew past the risk disclosures in 3 seconds. He bypassed the cross-collateralization clause without pausing his mouse wheel for a single fraction of a second. He did not forward the document to Marcus for legal review, refusing to pay a $1,000 hourly fee for a contract he assumed he understood. "He is bypassing the liability disclosures," I noted, a cold smirk touching the corners of my mouth. "He is rushing to the signature line," Elena observed, matching my quiet anticipation. The tracking software flashed a bright blue confirmation banner across the center of my monitor. Nathan applied his digital signature and time-stamped the execution. He signed away his company, his home, and his wealth in less than 2 minutes. "The contract is executed," Elena confirmed, her voice ringing with finality. "Authorize the $5 million wire transfer," I instructed, my jaw clenching as the trap locked. "The capital is en route to Nexus Logistics," she replied, severing the connection. I minimized the tracking portal and opened the corporate espionage dashboard Vanguard utilized to monitor active investments. We maintained passive surveillance on all executives holding our debt. I accessed the internal communication channels for Nexus Logistics, breaching their unencrypted employee messaging platform. The general company channel was exploding with activity. Chloe posted a photograph to the executive thread. I clicked the thumbnail, enlarging the image on my screen. Nathan stood at the head of a polished glass boardroom table, holding a bottle of premium champagne. Chloe stood next to him, gripping a plastic cup, leaning her head against his shoulder. The rest of the marketing team surrounded them, cheering with their hands raised. Nathan wore a triumphant, wide-toothed grin, his chest puffed out under his tailored suit. He was celebrating a massive financial victory, boasting to his employees about securing a legendary round of private equity funding. He soaked in the adoration of his mistress and his staff, projecting the image of a tech visionary who had just saved his struggling empire. His tie was loosened, his face flushed with the arrogant high of a man who believed he had conquered the financial world. He had no idea he was celebrating his own funeral. I stared at the photograph, tracing the line of his smug jaw with my eyes. The bitter chill of the motel draft brushed against my neck, a stark contrast to the warm, champagne-soaked boardroom radiating from my monitor. He thought he discarded a useless, broke paralegal. He thought he outsmarted a naive group of foreign investors. He toasted to his brilliance, oblivious to the fact that the woman sleeping in a peeling motel room just 3 miles away now held the uncontested legal rights to his entire financial future. I pressed the print command on my keyboard. The small, portable laser printer I had set up on the corner of the laminate desk whirred to life. The machine spat out the 50-page loan agreement, the ink warm against the crisp white paper. The final page bore his digital signature, a binding contract of his own destruction. I picked up the stack of papers, aligning the edges with a sharp tap against the desk. I opened the black Manila folder and placed the executed bridge loan directly on top of the wire fraud dossier and the divorce petition. The 10-day countdown was now actively ticking. I rested my hand on the closed Manila folder for a fraction of a second before a sharp, rhythmic pounding echoed through the motel room door. The cheap wood rattled in its metal frame, vibrating against the wall. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the worn carpet, and walked toward the entrance. I checked the glass peephole. A courier in a dark navy uniform stood on the concrete walkway, shifting his weight against the chilling Chicago wind, clutching a thick package against his chest. I turned the brass deadbolt and pulled the door open just enough to receive the delivery. The courier thrust a heavy, oversized envelope through the narrow gap. "Signature required," he muttered, holding out a digital tablet. I took the plastic stylus, signing a swift, illegible scrawl across the illuminated screen, and pushed the door shut. The deadbolt clicked back into place, sealing the freezing draft outside. I flipped the heavy envelope over in my hands. The thick, cream-colored parchment felt entirely foreign in the dingy, fluorescent-lit motel environment. A raised gold foil crest gleamed in the center of the paper, displaying the intertwined initials of Kensington and Associates. Nathan had deployed his attack dog. I walked back to the laminate desk, picked up my crafting scalpel, and sliced the top edge of the envelope. I extracted a 3-page document printed on premium, watermarked stationery. The letterhead bore the name of Marcus, a senior equity partner renowned throughout the city for a $1,000 hourly billing rate and a reputation for bleeding opposing litigants dry. I read the opening paragraphs, my eyes scanning the dense, aggressive legal jargon. Marcus bypassed standard mediation protocols, launching directly into a brutal, condescending assault. He demanded I immediately sign the divorce surrender forms Nathan had taped to my front door. The financial stipulations were explicit and merciless. I was to formally relinquish all claims to the $1.2 million Nathan had siphoned from our joint checking account, in exchange for my total compliance and my absolute silence. Marcus offered a pathetic $5,000 relocation fee. He phrased the minimal sum as an act of extreme generosity on behalf of my husband, framing it as a charitable donation to a discarded spouse. I traced the edge of the parchment with my thumb, maintaining a slow, steady breathing rhythm. My pulse did not elevate a single beat. The final page of the document transitioned rapidly from formal demands to explicit, vicious threats. Marcus promised to bury me in a mountain of endless, suffocating litigation if I dared to contest the surrender terms. He outlined a ruthless strategy to drag my name through public court records, threatening to subpoena my employers and ensure I never worked as a paralegal in the state of Illinois again. He intended to bankrupt me through legal fees alone, relying on the assumption that my financial resources were restricted to a frozen checking account and a modest hourly wage. He wrote the letter assuming his opponent was a terrified, abandoned housewife trembling in the shadows. He intended to break my spirit using the immense weight of his prestigious law firm as a blunt instrument. I did not draft a desperate, weeping reply to his downtown office. I did not search the internet for a discount family lawyer to beg for a deferred payment plan. I gripped the top of the premium parchment with both hands. I braced my wrists, applying a sharp, twisting motion. The thick paper tore with a loud, satisfying rip. I stacked the severed halves, gripped them again, and tore them into quarters. I continued tearing until Marcus's expensive, $1,000 an hour threat was reduced to a handful of jagged, illegible confetti. I opened my fingers, letting the shredded pieces fall into the cheap plastic trash can resting beneath the laminate desk. "Your leverage is an illusion," I whispered, staring down at the torn paper. I sat back down in the creaking chair and pulled my laptop toward the edge of the desk. The glow of the screen reflected in the dark window pane. If Marcus wanted to use his law firm as a weapon, I needed to inspect the structural integrity of his arsenal. I needed to see exactly how much weight his prestigious crest actually carried in the dark corners of the financial sector. I opened my encrypted terminal, bypassing the consumer networks, and accessed Vanguard's institutional stress test protocols. I entered the corporate tax identification numbers for Kensington and Associates. "Initiating a comprehensive structural audit on opposing counsel," I murmured, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. I did not bother analyzing their win-loss record in the courtroom. I bypassed their prestigious client roster and their polished public relations materials. I dug straight into the absolute bedrock of their financial standing. Law firms of that massive scale operated on staggering overhead, requiring constant liquidity to fund their lavish downtown offices, their equity partner distributions, and their extensive support staff. I queried the regional banking databases, pulling the commercial debt profiles linked directly to the firm. The initial results cascaded down my monitor in a rapid stream of green data blocks. Kensington and Associates presented a facade of untouchable prestige to the Chicago legal community. But the raw numbers populating my screen told a vastly different, highly volatile story. I highlighted their primary operational credit lines. The firm was severely, dangerously over-leveraged. I opened a secondary window, tracing the origin of their massive debt burden. Marcus and his senior partners had made a catastrophic miscalculation 5 years ago. They had aggressively expanded their physical footprint, signing a 10-year commercial lease for 3 floors of premium real estate in a luxury downtown high-rise. They financed the expansion and the lavish renovations through a series of complex, floating-rate commercial loans, anticipating a massive surge in corporate litigation revenue that never materialized. I ran a predictive modeling algorithm on their current debt-to-income ratio. The commercial real estate market had shifted, their rent had skyrocketed, and their loan interest rates had ballooned beyond their capacity to pay. My eyes scanned the amortization schedules, my jaw relaxing slightly as the true depth of their vulnerability emerged. Marcus was drowning in toxic commercial real estate debt. The law firm was burning through their cash reserves just to cover the monthly interest payments on the high-rise offices. I pulled their accounts payable ledger, cross-referencing their payment history over the past 90 days. They were intentionally delaying bonus payouts to their junior associates and stalling payments to external vendors. They were gasping for air, hiding their impending corporate insolvency behind tailored Italian suits and gold foil letterheads. I tapped my fingernail against the desk, a cold, razor-sharp smile touching the corners of my mouth. Marcus threatened to bankrupt a paralegal, completely unaware that his own prestigious empire was resting on a financial fault line waiting to fracture. I picked up my secure device and initiated a voice connection to my chief operations officer. "The channel is locked and encrypted," Elena stated, the subtle hum of the Vanguard servers echoing in the background. "I received a formal threat from opposing counsel," I informed her, my eyes locked on the commercial debt figures. "Shall I dispatch the legal defense team?" Elena asked, pausing her typing. "No," I replied, shaking my head at the glowing monitor. "Specify your countermeasure," she requested, her tone shifting to immediate operational readiness. "Marcus is vulnerable," I explained, highlighting a specific row of red data. "Are they hiding a liquidity crisis?" Elena observed, pulling the mirrored data onto her terminal. "Kensington and Associates is buckling under toxic leases," I noted, pointing at the screen. "They hold a massive operational credit line," she anticipated, her voice tightening with calculated focus. "The regional bank will want to offload it," I stated, reading the covenant deadlines. A crumbling foundation always looks perfect from the outside. Marcus believed he was the apex predator in the courtroom, leveraging his reputation to crush the weak. He failed to realize that true power did not reside in angry letters or hourly billing rates. True power resided in holding the deed to the predator's cage. "Prepare a hostile acquisition strategy," I commanded, sitting back in the motel chair. "I will map the acquisition channels immediately," Elena confirmed, resuming her rapid keystrokes. "Do not alert their managing partners," I warned, watching the debt metrics cycle on my screen. "The purchase will remain entirely blind," she assured me, severing the connection. I stared at the financial autopsy of Kensington and Associates, mapping the exact trajectory of my impending strike. Marcus wanted to destroy my livelihood, so I was going to purchase his. I reached for the black Manila folder, ready to add a new set of targets to my execution list. I slid the empty Manila folder to the center of the laminate desk, smoothing my hand across the rigid black cardstock. My eyes shifted back to the glowing terminal. The operational credit line for Kensington and Associates pulsed on my monitor with a bright red warning banner. The countdown clock embedded in the bank ledger indicated exactly 48 hours until absolute default. Marcus and his senior partners were actively drowning in their own financial incompetence. I pressed a specific sequence of keys, elevating my encrypted audio channel into a secure, high-definition video link. The screen divided seamlessly. The left half displayed the bleeding financial metrics of the law firm. The right half illuminated with a crisp, clear broadcast originating from the primary executive boardroom of Vanguard Holdings. Elena sat at the head of a massive, polished obsidian table. The sprawling Chicago skyline stretched out behind her through floor-to-ceiling glass panels. The immaculate corporate fortress provided a stark, towering contrast to the cracked drywall and flickering fluorescent bulb of my motel room. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, her posture rigidly professional as she stared into the camera lens. "The video connection is stable," Elena confirmed, adjusting the microphone resting on the glass surface. I need a direct line to their regional bank, I instructed, tapping the trackpad to highlight the specific loan originators. They are holding highly toxic commercial leases, Elena observed, leaning closer to her monitor. Marcus is desperately seeking a private equity bailout, I stated, watching the debt metrics tick upward. He requires immediate capital to avoid insolvency, she noted, her eyes tracking the exact same data points. They were scrambling in the dark, leveraging their prestigious reputation to solicit shadow investors. They hoped to secure a quiet lifeline to hide their gross mismanagement from the Illinois Bar Association. The regional bank holding their paper was equally desperate. The bank needed that massive liability removed from their books before the upcoming quarterly reporting deadline. They were searching for a buyer willing to absorb the catastrophic risk. "We will provide the capital," I commanded, leaning back into the stiff metal springs of the motel chair. "Shall I structure a standard bridge loan?" Elena asked, hovering her fingers over the mechanical keyboard. "No," I replied, shaking my head slowly. "I want outright ownership." I pulled up the contact profile for the executive vice president of the regional bank currently suffocating under Kensington's bad debt. I did not intend to negotiate a payment plan or offer Marcus a generous extension. I intended to execute a hostile takeover of his entire professional existence. "Initiate an aggressive purchase order immediately," I ordered, my jaw locking into a tight, hard line. "They will require a premium to expedite this," Elena warned. "Already opening a secure communication channel to the bank. Offer a 5% premium above market value," I countered, tracing the edge of the manila folder. "They will accept that instantly," Elena said, her fingers flying across the keys. "I want the transaction completed within 3 hours," I finalized, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I did not raise my pitch. I did not display a single ounce of anger regarding the vicious $1,000-an-hour threat Marcus had delivered to my door just hours prior. I operated with the glacial precision of a surgeon excising a malignant tumor. Marcus believed he was bullying a terrified, working-class wife. He had absolutely no idea he was actively writing threatening legal letters to the woman who was currently purchasing his salary, his pension, and his desk. The video feed remained open as Elena executed the hostile takeover. I watched her maneuver through the complex digital infrastructure of the financial sector. She dispatched targeted acquisition offers to the regional bank executives, utilizing Vanguard's immense liquidity as a blunt, undeniable instrument of force. I spent the intervening hours organizing the digital evidence against my husband and his mistress. I cross-referenced the geolocation data from Chloe's yacht photograph with the timestamp of the fraudulent insurance wire transfer, locking the metadata into a secure, read-only evidentiary file. I monitored the 10-day countdown clock ticking relentlessly on Nathan's toxic bridge loan. The motel room heater rattled loudly, blowing dry, stale air across my face. I poured a glass of tepid tap water from the bathroom sink, returning to the desk just as the red notification badge flashed across Elena's video feed. Exactly 3 hours had passed. "The regional executives accepted the premium offer," Elena announced, a rare, sharp smile touching her lips. "Confirm the transfer of the primary credit lines," I instructed, setting the glass of water onto the laminate surface. "The portfolios are migrating to our servers now," she reported, executing the final digital signatures on her end. I watched the proprietary tracking software light up. Massive blocks of encrypted financial data flooded into the Vanguard holding accounts, the commercial real estate leases, the operational credit lines, the payroll liabilities, and the equity stakes of Kensington and Associates transferred seamlessly across the digital network. "The transaction is fully cleared," Elena confirmed, her voice echoing with absolute finality. Vanguard Holdings officially became the primary debt holder and the ultimate parent company of the prestigious law firm. I now owned the lease to their luxury high-rise offices. I controlled the bank accounts that issued their partner distributions. I possessed the unilateral legal authority to dissolve their corporate structure, liquidate their assets, and terminate their employment without severance. I opened the corporate registry interface, watching the legal ownership titles overwrite in real time. Marcus's name was systematically demoted from a senior equity partner to a standard at-will employee operating under the direct jurisdiction of Vanguard Holdings. "Lock the operational accounts," I commanded, my eyes scanning the updated capitalization table. "Restricting their daily withdrawal limits now," Elena replied, applying the digital constraints to their banking profile. "Do not freeze the payroll system," I added, tapping my index finger against the desk. "We must maintain the illusion of standard operations," Elena anticipated, nodding slightly in agreement. If Marcus realized his firm had been acquired, he would attempt to leverage his client list to secure a position at a rival firm. I needed him to walk into the courtroom absolutely blind, utterly convinced of his own invincibility. A crumbling foundation always looks perfect from the outside. I intended to let him stand firmly on that foundation until the exact moment I swung the sledgehammer into the pillars of his prestigious career. "He believes he holds all the leverage," I murmured, staring at the digital ownership deed. "He is a minor obstacle," Elena stated, closing the banking portal on her monitor. "He is a liability," I corrected, leaning toward the camera lens. "Terminate the connection." The video feed vanished, plunging my screen back into the stark, black and green terminal interface. I sat in the dim motel room, the silence pressing heavily against my eardrums. I reached out and touched the portable laser printer resting on the corner of the desk. I pressed the command keys, initiating the print sequence for the acquisition documents. The machine hummed loudly, the internal rollers grabbing the crisp white paper. The official transfer of ownership, bearing the digital seal of the Illinois Financial Regulatory Commission, slid into the output tray. The pages were warm, smelling faintly of heated toner and ozone. I picked up the stack of papers, aligning the edges with a sharp, decisive tap against the laminate wood. I opened the heavy cover of the black manila folder. The acquisition documents settled perfectly on top of Nathan's toxic bridge loan contract, the wire fraud metadata, and the expedited divorce petition. The folder was growing thicker, gaining a physical weight that mirrored the crushing legal gravity contained within its pages. I closed the black cover, running my palm flat across the smooth cardstock. My encrypted phone vibrated against the desk, shattering the quiet focus of the room. A new notification flashed across the screen, originating from the corporate servers of a mid-tier compliance agency downtown. Nathan was moving again. He was launching a secondary strike, targeting what he assumed was my only remaining source of income. I picked up the device, my jaw tightening as I read the incoming data stream. The war was expanding beyond the marital estate and the law firm, bleeding directly into my fabricated professional life. I stared at the flashing alert, ready to dismantle his next attempt at sabotage. The notification illuminated the motel room wall, casting a pale light over the chipped gray paint. I swiped the screen, opening the secure email server routed through a proxy domain. The header bore the corporate logo of Sterling Compliance Group, a mid-tier regulatory agency operating out of a modest high-rise in downtown Chicago. For 5 years, I told Nathan I was a freelance legal researcher contracting for Sterling. I fabricated a supervisor, forged modest W-2 tax forms, and complained about grueling hours managing client data. He believed my entire livelihood depended on a mid-level manager sitting in that downtown office. He failed to realize I purchased Sterling Compliance Group 3 years ago through a heavily shielded blind trust. I was not a contractor. I was the sole owner, and the executive inbox forwarded directly to my encrypted device. A rapid succession of 5 priority emails populated the inbox. I tapped the first message. The sender address belonged to Nathan, originating from his Nexus Logistics executive account. My eyes scanned the subject line. He flagged the email as an urgent ethics violation. I opened the body of the text, reading the paragraphs he crafted to destroy me. Nathan accused me of systematically stealing confidential client data over the past 6 months. He claimed I stored restricted financial records on unsecured personal devices. He drafted a secondary paragraph, adopting a tone of manufactured concern. He alleged I was suffering from severe mental instability, citing erratic behavior and a detachment from reality. He urged the executive board to terminate my contract immediately and launch a full internal investigation to protect their corporate liability. My pulse maintained a steady, even rhythm. I set the phone flat against the laminate desk and read the next 3 emails. He CC'd the Director of Human Resources, the Chief Legal Counsel, and the Managing Director. He cast a wide net, attempting to maximize the collateral damage. He intended to sever my income, revoke my industry credentials, and humiliate me in front of my supposed peers. I traced the edge of my trackpad, shifting my attention to the metadata embedded in the email headers. I activated the voice link to my Chief Operations Officer. "The channel is live," Elena stated, typing softly in the background. "Nathan is targeting my fabricated employer," I informed her, keeping my voice low. "Is he contacting Sterling Compliance Group?" she asked, pausing her keystrokes. "He is emailing the executive board directly," I confirmed, scrolling through his fabricated accusations. "Shall I initiate a cease and desist protocol?" Elena suggested, the sound of a mouse clicking echoing over the line. "Do not block his correspondence," I instructed, leaning closer to the monitor. "He is constructing a defamation case," she noted, reading the mirrored inbox feed. "He is committing federal wire fraud," I corrected, highlighting the routing data. "The servers are located across state lines," Elena observed, confirming the federal jurisdiction. "Archive every single message," I commanded, tapping the desk with my index finger. "Logging the IP addresses and timestamps now," she replied, executing the command sequence. I watched the proprietary Vanguard software strip the emails of their superficial formatting. The system extracted the numerical IP addresses, tracing the origin of the messages directly to his downtown office at Nexus Logistics. I documented the exact second each email left his server. He was writing his own federal indictment, assuming he was speaking to a vulnerable human resources department. He was providing a ghost owner with undeniable, time-stamped proof of malicious intent and corporate sabotage. The terminal chimed again. A 6th email hit the inbox. He was relentless. I opened the new message. This one contained a fabricated timeline, detailing specific dates and times he claimed to have witnessed me downloading restricted files onto an external hard drive. My teeth ground together, the muscles in my jaw tightening to the point of a dull ache. He was fabricating a criminal narrative, attempting to project his own federal crimes onto me. He was the one who stole $1.2 million. He was the one who committed wire fraud with a vintage diamond necklace. Yet, he sat in his glass office, typing detailed lies to paint me as the corporate thief. "He just submitted a forged incident timeline," I said, transmitting the new file to Elena. "He is escalating his narrative," Elena observed, receiving the data packet. "He wants Sterling to report me to the authorities," I noted, watching his arrogance manifest in text. "It establishes malicious prosecution intent," she replied, her voice remaining sterile and focused. "Compile the metadata into a formal evidentiary log," I instructed, adjusting my posture in the rigid motel chair. "The log is generating," Elena confirmed, the hum of the servers rising slightly. I scrutinized the legal architecture of his assault. By transmitting fraudulent accusations of corporate theft across state lines to a server hosted in Virginia, Nathan elevated a simple lie into federal wire fraud. If he intended to use my subsequent termination as leverage in the divorce proceedings, he was laying the groundwork for perjury. He was constructing a trap built entirely on digital falsehoods, failing to realize the walls were closing in on him. I tapped my thumbnail against the spacebar, analyzing his strategy. He was desperate to sever my financial independence before the mandatory court hearing. He wanted me walking into the courtroom broken, unemployed, and desperate for the $5,000 settlement Marcus had offered. I reached for my glass of water, taking a slow, measured swallow. The cold liquid washed down my throat, grounding me in the sterile environment of the motel room. I set the glass down precisely on a faded ring mark scarring the laminate wood. When an adversary digs a hole, you do not interrupt them. You simply hand them a larger shovel. Nathan assumed the compliance agency would panic, suspend me, and launch a blind inquiry. He expected a frantic, weeping phone call from me, begging him to retract his statements. I offered him nothing but silence. The portable laser printer whirred to life on the corner of the desk. I did not need to issue the print command. Elena routed the evidentiary log directly to my physical location. The machine pulled the crisp white paper, depositing the warm sheets into the output tray. I picked up the stack of documents. The pages contained the raw code of Nathan's emails, exposing the geographic coordinates of his laptop, the network identifier of his startup, and the exact chronological sequence of his lies. I squared the edges of the paper against the desk, the sharp tapping sound filling the quiet room. I reached for the thick black manila folder resting beside the printer. I flipped the heavy cardstock cover open. The folder already housed the Delaware Shell Company routing numbers, the Toxic Bridge loan contract, the hostile takeover deeds for Kensington and Associates, and the expedited divorce petition. I placed the defamation log gently on top of the stack. The physical weight of the folder was growing, transforming into a dense, lethal weapon. I closed the cover, pressing my palm flat against the black cardboard. The heating unit kicked off, plunging the room into a deep, chilling silence. My stomach gave a hollow, rhythmic rumble, reminding me I had not consumed solid food since the previous afternoon. The war required sustenance. I needed to leave the perimeter of the motel and step into the city. I pulled my trench coat off the back of the wooden chair. Sliding my arms into the sleeves, I buttoned the front, concealing my simple navy trousers and white blouse. I picked up my encrypted phone, slipping it into my deep pocket. I walked toward the motel room door, securing the brass deadbolt behind me. I stepped out into the freezing Chicago wind, ready to secure a coffee in the downtown district, entirely unaware that Chloe was currently spending my stolen money in that exact same neighborhood. The train ride into the Central Financial District took 22 minutes. I stood gripping the overhead metal bar, feeling the rhythmic sway of the carriage. The freezing air rushing through the sliding doors bit at my exposed wrists. But I ignored the chill. I exited the station, merging into the dense crowd of commuters navigating the cracked concrete sidewalks of LaSalle Street. I blended seamlessly into the sea of pedestrians. My plain gray trench coat and scuffed leather flats rendered me virtually invisible among the tailored suits and imported wool overcoats moving toward the towering glass banking headquarters. I pushed through the heavy glass door of an upscale espresso bar nestled at the base of a commercial high-rise. The sharp hiss of a pressurized steam wand cut through the low hum of morning business negotiations. The air carried the dense, bitter scent of roasted coffee beans. I joined the short queue standing before the polished marble counter, pulling my collar up slightly to shield my neck from the draft of the swinging entrance door. My eyes scanned the digital menu board. I reached into my trench coat pocket to retrieve my prepaid corporate expense card. The heavy glass door swung open again, catching the morning glare. A sharp, rapid clicking of stiletto heels striking the terrazzo floor echoed through the cafe. The sound demanded attention, carrying a deliberate, heavy cadence designed to force patrons to turn their heads. I shifted my gaze toward the entrance. Chloe stepped into the establishment, bringing a thick wave of cloying, heavy floral perfume that immediately overpowered the scent of the roasted coffee. The 26-year-old vice president of marketing for Nexus Logistics wore a pristine, camel-colored cashmere coat draped over her shoulders. A tailored crimson dress clung to her frame, stopping just above her knees. The red soles of her designer heels flashed with every exaggerated step she took, resting heavily against her collarbone, catching the recessed lighting of the espresso bar. was my grandmother's vintage diamond necklace. The platinum teardrop setting gleamed, a stolen federal asset paraded openly in a public venue. Two junior marketing executives flanked her. Struggling to match her aggressive pace, they carried thick, leather-bound portfolios stamped with the Nexus Logistics corporate logo. They hovered near her elbows, projecting the eager, desperate body language of subordinates trying to appease a volatile superior. Chloe paused near the pastry display, removing her oversized designer sunglasses. Her eyes swept across the patrons waiting in line, assessing the room for potential networking targets. Her gaze slid past the suited bankers and landed squarely on my plain gray trench coat. Her perfectly contoured eyebrows stitched together for a fraction of a second. The recognition registered in her wide eyes. The brief flash of surprise instantly melted into a sharp, predatory smirk. She adjusted the strap of her oversized leather handbag, rolling her shoulders back to maximize her posture. Chloe broke away from her junior executives, strutting directly toward my position in the queue. Her stilettos clicked loudly, announcing her approach to everyone standing near the register. I did not turn my body away. I kept my hands resting loosely in the deep pockets of my trench coat. My pulse maintained a steady, even rhythm of 60 beats per minute. I watched her approach with the detached, clinical observation of a biologist watching an insect crawl toward a chemical trap. Chloe stopped mere inches from my shoulder, invading my personal space. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the frayed hem of my coat and the scuffed toes of my flats. She tilted her head, letting out a sharp, theatrical sigh designed to project maximum pity. "It must be so hard losing your house and your husband in the same week," Chloe sneered, her voice carrying across the quiet cafe. The barista working the espresso machine paused, the metal pitcher hovering over a paper cup. Three businessmen standing in the adjacent line stopped their conversation, turning their heads to watch the confrontation. Chloe thrived on an audience. She fed on the attention, drawing energy from the sudden, uncomfortable silence descending over the marble counter. I kept my chin level, maintaining direct eye contact. I did not blink. I did not open my mouth to issue a desperate defense. "You look exhausted," Chloe mocked, twisting her lips into a cruel pout. She reached a manicured hand into the depths of her designer purse. Her fingers rummaged through the interior, brushing past cosmetics and leather wallets. She pulled out a crisp, uncirculated $100 bill. She held the currency between her index and middle finger, waving it slightly in the air to ensure the surrounding patrons registered the denomination. She flicked her wrist, tossing the paper currency. The bill fluttered through the air, landing on the polished marble counter directly in front of my hands. "Buy yourself something nice." "Ruby," Chloe instructed, stepping back to admire her work. I stared at the green ink resting on the cold stone surface. "You look genuinely pathetic," she finalized, crossing her arms over her chest. Her two junior executives shuffled awkwardly behind her, exchanging nervous, wide-eyed glances. They waited for the inevitable explosion. They expected the scorned, bankrupt wife to lunge forward, hurl a scalding cup of coffee across the counter, and initiate a screaming match that would require security intervention. I did not throw a beverage in her face. I did not scream a single expletive. I did not raise a hand to slap the smug, manufactured expression from her perfectly powdered cheek. Silence isn't a sign of weakness, it is a loaded weapon. I lowered my eyes to the $100 bill. I processed the precise operational parameters surrounding this encounter. Nexus Logistics was currently locked into a mandatory 10-day debt covenant initiated by Apex Capital just 24 hours prior. Federal financial regulations mandated a strict corporate blackout period during the execution of a $5 million bridge loan. Executive officers were legally prohibited from engaging in off-site equity negotiations or transacting physical corporate capital without strict digital logging. Furthermore, the two junior executives flanking Chloe were holding physical investment pitch decks. They were conducting an unauthorized roadshow in the financial district to solicit secondary backing. attempting to circumvent the toxic cross-collateralization clauses I had buried in Nathan's loan agreement. By physically standing in this downtown cafe during trading hours, engaging with subordinates carrying unregistered prospectuses, Chloe was actively violating Section 10 of the Securities Exchange Act. More importantly, Nathan had filed a sworn affidavit in his expedited divorce petition claiming Chloe was attending a mandatory, week-long marketing summit in a completely different state, attempting to shield her from a deposition regarding the stolen marital assets. Her physical presence in this exact Chicago espresso bar obliterated his sworn legal alibi. I needed indisputable physical proof placing her at this exact geographic coordinate at this specific hour. The cafe surveillance cameras recorded video, but defense attorneys routinely challenged grainy security footage. Citing mistaken identity, I needed forensic permanence. I reached into the deep right pocket of my trench coat. My fingers brushed past the prepaid expense card and located a small, transparent polymer evidence sleeve. I carried the sterile sleeves out of sheer professional habit, a standard protocol left over from my years conducting physical corporate audits in hostile boardrooms. I slipped my right hand into the polymer bag, using the clear plastic as a sterile glove. I raised my hand, moving with slow, deliberate precision. The entire cafe watched in breathless silence. Chloe's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, her brow furrowing in slight confusion as she tracked my movement. I pressed the plastic-wrapped tips of my fingers against the crisp edges of the $100 bill. I did not touch the center of the paper, preserving the fresh, oily ridges her manicured fingers had pressed deep into the currency fibers when she pulled it from her purse. I pinched the corner of the bill, lifting it off the cold marble counter. I inverted the polymer sleeve, pulling the plastic over the currency with a swift, fluid motion. I sealed the red adhesive strip at the top of the bag, locking the bill securely inside the sterile vacuum. The sharp, synthetic zip of the adhesive sealing echoed loudly in the quiet space. "What are you doing?" Chloe demanded, her voice dropping its theatrical volume. I did not answer her. I slid the sealed evidence bag into the secure interior pocket of my trench coat, pressing the fabric flat against my ribs. She had just handed me a physical object covered in her distinct biometric identifiers. I had just secured the physical evidence required to finalize her insider trading conviction and prove Nathan's perjury in a federal courtroom. She intended to buy a moment of cheap, public humiliation. She had unknowingly purchased her own federal indictment. I turned away from the counter, abandoning my place in the queue. The barista stood frozen, staring at the empty patch of marble where the money had rested seconds prior. I walked toward the heavy glass exit doors, my sensible flats making barely a whisper against the terrazzo floor. "I am talking to you," Chloe snapped, taking a rapid step forward. I pushed the glass door open, stepping out into the freezing rush of the Chicago wind. The heavy door swung shut behind me, severing her voice and locking her inside the espresso bar. I merged back into the dense flow of pedestrian traffic on LaSalle Street, pulling my collar up against the cold. I touched the rigid edge of the polymer bag resting in my pocket. The physical weight of the evidence anchored my focus. Nathan and his mistress were aggressive, erratic, and blinded by their own unearned arrogance. They threw money onto counters and filed expedited court motions, believing speed and volume equaled power. I navigated the crowded crosswalk, heading back toward the underground transit station. I needed to return to the anonymous motel room. The mandatory preliminary hearing was rapidly approaching on the court docket. Marcus and Nathan expected me to cower in the shadows, paralyzed by the freezing of my domestic accounts and the threat of crushing legal fees. They expected me to arrive at the courthouse begging for the $5,000 settlement. I tapped my fingers against my trench coat, feeling the crisp outline of the sealed evidence. I stepped onto the descending escalator, the shadows of the subterranean station swallowing the daylight. The noose was perfectly braided. It was time to pull the lever. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the steel tracks matched my slow, steady heartbeat. I braced my hand against the cold metal pole as the carriage lurched toward the suburban limits. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting pale shadows across the faces of the exhausted commuters surrounding me. I kept my free hand tucked inside my trench coat pocket, my fingertips resting lightly against the rigid polymer sleeve securing the $100 bill. My encrypted phone vibrated against my ribs. The notification pulsed twice, indicating a high-priority document transmission originating from the Illinois Superior Court digital filing system. I pulled the device from my pocket, shielding the screen from the periphery of the adjacent passengers. The header displayed the gold crest of Kensington and Associates. Marcus had officially filed his motion. I opened the attached file, scrolling past the standard county clerk watermarks. Marcus requested an expedited default judgment on behalf of my husband. The legal phrasing dripped with unearned condescension. He cited my failure to retain counsel and my refusal to respond to his previous mailed demands as definitive proof of my capitulation. He urged the presiding judge to grant Nathan full, uncontested control over the stolen $1.2 million. He further requested the court finalize the asset division entirely on his client's terms, waiving any mandated mediation periods. Marcus banked his entire legal strategy on a single, highly predictable assumption. He believed I was a terrified, destitute paralegal sitting in a freezing motel room, paralyzed by the sheer weight of his $1,000 hourly billing rate. He expected me to ignore the summons out of pure embarrassment, hiding from the crushing reality of my ruined marriage. He assumed my silence was a symptom of my lack of resources. If I missed the preliminary hearing outlined in the document, standard court procedure dictated the judge would likely rule in their favor. Nathan would walk away with the stolen capital, secure his startup financing, and dissolve our marriage without ever having to look me in the eye. The train decelerated, the brakes squeaking loudly as we pulled into my designated station. I stepped onto the concrete platform, navigating the turnstiles and ascending the concrete stairs toward the street level. The biting Chicago wind whipped my coat around my knees. I did not draft a frantic email to the court clerk begging for a continuance. I did not search the internet for a pro bono defense attorney to file a desperate objection. I unlocked the motel room door, the brass deadbolt clicking heavily in the quiet space. The stale, heated air from the rattling unit washed over my face. I removed my trench coat, draping it over the wooden chair, and carefully extracted the polymer evidence bag from the inner pocket. I placed the sealed currency flat onto the laminate desk, right beside my encrypted terminal. I activated the voice link to my chief operations officer. "The secure channel is open," Elena stated, the subtle clicking of her mechanical keyboard echoing over the line. "Marcus filed the expedited default motion," I informed her, staring at the digital court summons glowing on my monitor. "Did he request an immediate asset surrender?" she asked, pausing her typing. "He wants the $1.2 million finalized by Friday," I replied, tracing the sealed edge of the evidence bag. "The preliminary objection deadline is tomorrow at noon," Elena noted, reviewing the mirrored court docket on her end. "I am not filing an objection," I instructed, my voice maintaining a flat, even pitch. "A missed deadline triggers an automatic default ruling," Elena warned, her tone shifting to strict operational caution. "A missed deadline on a contested asset of this size triggers a mandatory in-person ruling," I corrected, leaning back into the stiff springs of the chair. "You want them in a physical courtroom," Elena realized, resuming her rapid keystrokes. "I want them on the public record," I finalized, my jaw locking into place. "Judge Elias Thorne is presiding over the docket," Elena observed, the sound of her mouse clicking sharply. "He requires physical presence for high-value defaults," I murmured, staring at the Vanguard logo on my screen. "I will monitor the system for his mandate," she confirmed, severing the connection. I shifted my attention back to the digital summons. I clicked the file icon, dragging it across my desktop, hovering it directly over a secure deletion folder engineered to wipe data beyond forensic recovery. I released the trackpad, The file vanished from the drive. I offered them no legal resistance whatsoever. The next 24 hours crawled forward in the cramped, dimly lit motel room. I spent the time collating the physical documents for my black Manila folder. The metadata proving Chloe's presence on the yacht. The toxic bridge loan contract bearing Nathan's digital signature. The corporate acquisition deeds granting Vanguard Holdings ownership of Kensington and Associates. And the sealed $100 bill all rested securely inside the heavy cardstock cover. I organized each document with precise color-coded tabs, engineering a lethal presentation. I reviewed the 10-day balloon payment timeline tied to Nathan's $5 million loan. The toxic debt covenant I had forced into the agreement was maturing exactly as projected. Nexus Logistics was burning through the injected capital, prioritizing outstanding vendor debts and executive bonuses over prudent financial management. Nathan was spending money he mathematically could not repay, marching blindly toward the cliff edge I had meticulously carved for him. I watched the digital clock on my terminal tick toward noon. The preliminary objection window was rapidly closing. Marcus was likely sitting in his luxury high-rise office, watching the exact same clock, sipping an imported espresso, and celebrating his effortless victory. He assumed my silence equated to total surrender. He believed his threatening letter had broken my resolve, at precisely 12:01. The deadline expired. I refreshed the Illinois Superior Court portal on my monitor. The digital docket updated instantly. Marcus's motion for an automatic default was flagged by the automated clerk system and escalated directly to Judge Elias Thorne. In high-value marital asset disputes, a total lack of response from the defending party forces the court to verify the legal standing in a recorded venue to prevent procedural exploitation. Judge Thorne, a strict constitutionalist, never allowed lawyers to bypass due process in asset seizures. 10 minutes later, a new notification pulsed on my screen. The judge issued a mandatory, in-person summons for a final ruling, scheduled for the following morning at 9 o'clock. I tapped my fingernail against the laminate desk, a slow, methodical rhythm echoing in the quiet room. I had lured them out of the shadows. They could no longer hide behind threatening emails, encrypted text messages, or expensive legal letterheads. They were legally obligated to stand in a highly publicized, recorded judicial arena. They wanted to humiliate a broken, helpless wife in an open courtroom. Unaware they were happily walking into an inescapable federal slaughterhouse. I stood up from the desk, walking toward the small, smudged motel mirror bolted above the sink. I smoothed the lapels of my simple navy blouse, adjusting the collar with precise, calculated movements. I did not need a $1,000 Italian suit to command a room. I did not need a team of expensive associate attorneys to validate my presence. My power resided in the black Manila folder resting on the desk behind me. The dominoes were perfectly aligned, the gaps sealed, the escape routes locked. Marcus believed he controlled the legal narrative. Nathan believed he controlled the financial reality. Chloe believed she controlled the social hierarchy. They were all functioning under a collective, fatal delusion. Tomorrow morning, I would watch Judge Thorne shatter their reality. I turned away from the mirror, walking back to the desk to run one final diagnostic check on the Vanguard acquisition servers. The hostile takeover of Marcus's law firm remained undetected. The trap was primed. The digital clock in the lower corner of my monitor ticked to 11:58 in the evening. The harsh white numbers cut through the dim shadows of the motel room. The 10-day timeline attached to Nathan's $5 million bridge loan possessed exactly 120 seconds of remaining viability. I opened a secure audio link to my chief operations officer. The default parameters are queued, Elena stated, her keystrokes echoing over the encrypted line. He ignored the final repayment warning, I noted, tracing the edge of my trackpad. He assumed Apex Capital functions like a traditional lender, she observed, her tone devoid of pity. He expects to pay a minor penalty fee tomorrow, I replied, leaning closer to the glowing screen. Initiate the cross-collateralization sequence on your mark, Elena instructed, pausing her typing. I shifted my gaze to the network monitoring interface Vanguard maintained on all active debtors. Nathan was currently logged into his Nexus Logistics executive terminal. He was not reviewing his accounts payable ledger, and he was not drafting an extension request to his lenders. His active web traffic revealed he was browsing a digital catalog for imported sports cars. He was selecting custom leather interiors, treating the $5 million capital injection as a personal slush fund. A secondary window on his desktop showed an active messaging thread with Chloe. He was actively promising his 26-year-old vice president of marketing a celebratory vacation to the Caribbean immediately following the morning court hearing. He bragged about the effortless legal victory awaiting them, mocking the fact that I had not filed a single objection. He believed the shadow investors operating Apex Capital were disorganized and compliant. He assumed a missed balloon payment would simply trigger an automated email and a negligible interest hike. He lacked the fundamental financial literacy to understand the lethal trap he had signed his name to. The clock shifted to 11:59. "He is browsing luxury vehicles," I murmured, my jaw tightening at the staggering entitlement. "His corporate accounts are drawn to zero," Elena reported, verifying the liquidity void. "He spent money he mathematically cannot replace," I said, resting my index finger over the return key. "The grace period expires in 10 seconds, she warned. The server hum increasing in the background. I watched the final seconds bleed away. My breathing slowed, matching the methodical ticking of the digital interface. The seconds hit 0. The clock struck 12. The date rolled over. "Execute the seizure," I commanded, pressing the key with a sharp, definitive tap. The Vanguard recovery software bypassed the standard collections protocol, activating the toxic debt covenants buried deep within Section 4 of his loan agreement. The digital lock snapped shut across his entire empire in a rapid, cascading sequence of red alerts. The first target was his corporate infrastructure. Apex Capital legally seized absolute control of the Nexus Logistics operating accounts. I watched the proprietary dashboard update in real time as the banking credentials overwrote. Nathan lost his administrative access to the primary ledgers. His payroll system froze, severing the scheduled direct deposits for his entire staff, including Chloe's inflated executive salary. The foreclosure software moved faster than a human operator ever could. It targeted the proprietary logistics routing software his trucks utilized to navigate their daily supply chains. The source code locked, rendering his central dispatch servers entirely dark in a matter of seconds. His highly valued tech startup transformed into a hollow, non-functional shell. He could not pay his vendors. He could not route his drivers. And he could not access a single cent of corporate capital. "The commercial entity is secured," Elena confirmed, her voice sterile and precise. "Pierce the corporate veil," I instructed, shifting my attention to his domestic portfolio. "Activating the personal liability clauses now," she replied, executing the secondary command sequence. Because Nathan had arrogantly signed the unread cross-collateralization mandate. The bridge loan was tied directly to his personal identity. Vanguard Holdings bypassed the boundaries of his limited liability company. The software targeted the deed to our sprawling marital estate, the same stone house he had locked me out of just days prior. The digital property registry for the county updated instantly. The ownership title transferred from Nathan's name into a holding trust managed exclusively by Vanguard. He was currently sitting in a leather chair inside a home he no longer legally possessed. "The residential deed is captured," Elena noted, the sound of her mouse clicking echoing softly. "Freeze the offshore trusts," I added, narrowing my eyes at the monitor. "Targeting the Delaware Shell Company," she responded, tracing the path of the stolen funds. The software located Horizon Logistics Holdings, the fraudulent entity Nathan had constructed to wash the $1.2 million he siphoned from our joint checking account. Apex Capital absorbed the Shell Company as a delinquent asset. The offshore routing numbers froze, The stolen capital was locked inside a digital vault controlled entirely by the woman he assumed was sleeping in a cheap Honda. I sat back against the stiff metal springs of the motel chair, releasing a slow, measured breath. I rubbed my temples, processing the sheer magnitude of the digital devastation unfolding on my screens. The entire financial execution required exactly 60 seconds. In 1 minute, Nathan went from a wealthy, arrogant tech CEO to a man possessing negative net worth. He did not own his startup. He did not own his home. He did not own his bank accounts. He was a corporate ghost. The asset seizure is complete, Elena stated, finalizing the audit logs. He is financially dead, I murmured, staring at his locked network profile. The banking notifications are pending the batch cycle, she pointed out, highlighting the server delay. I tapped my fingernail against the laminate desk, processing the logistical reality of the banking sector. Major financial institutions process massive corporate seizures during overnight batch cycles. The automated emails, the locked account alerts, and the foreclosure notices would not transmit to his personal devices until the start of standard business hours the following morning. The alerts will hold until 9 o'clock, I said, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. He will remain blind until the court convenes. Elena agreed, understanding the strategic advantage. Terminate the connection, I ordered, reaching for the close button. Standing by for the courtroom fallout, she said, cutting the feed. The screen returned to the silent, dark interface. The motel heater rattled, blowing dry air against my ankles. I turned my head, looking at the black manila folder resting on the corner of the desk. Nathan would wake up in a few hours, dress in a tailored suit, and drink expensive espresso in a kitchen he did not own. He would drive to the Illinois Superior Court believing he held the upper hand, anticipating an easy, undefended default judgment to finalize his divorce. He would walk through the heavy mahogany doors expecting to humiliate a broken, helpless paralegal in front of his mistress. He believed he was a king marching into a victory lap. He had no idea he was marching directly to the gallows. I reached over and opened the black cardstock cover. I printed the finalized foreclosure deeds, the frozen account ledgers, and the locked capitalization table for Nexus Logistics. The portable laser printer whirred loudly, the fresh, warm pages sliding into the output tray one by one. I stacked the documents, aligning their edges with a sharp tap against the desk, and placed them into the folder alongside the wire fraud metadata and the hostile takeover receipts for Kensington and Associates. The folder was dense, heavy with the weight of 3 ruined lives. I closed the cover, pressing my palm flat against it. The preliminary motions were finished. The debt was collected. The only remaining task was the physical presentation of the evidence in a court of law. I turned off the desk lamp, letting the neon light from the motel parking lot spill through the thin curtains, and waited for the dawn. The pale blue light of dawn bled through the narrow gap in the motel curtains. The illumination crawled across the peeling wallpaper, eventually striking the edge of the scratched laminate desk. I kept my eyes fixed on the glowing monitor. The digital clock in the corner of the screen shifted to 6 in the morning. The mandatory preliminary hearing at the Illinois Superior Court was scheduled for 9. The final window for preparation was closing rapidly. I reached for my encrypted device, pressing the secure speed dial key. The connection is stabilized, Elena announced, the steady rhythm of her mechanical keyboard filling the background. Initiate the final phase of the acquisition, I instructed, leaning closer to the terminal. The regional bank is unlocking the escrow accounts, she replied, her keystrokes accelerating into a rapid cadence. I opened the proprietary Vanguard tracking dashboard, mirroring her access to the financial clearinghouse. Marcus and his senior partners had leveraged their equity in Kensington and Associates to secure their toxic commercial real estate loans. When Vanguard Holdings purchased that debt from the regional bank at a 5% premium, we acquired the embedded equity conversion clauses. The 48-hour default window had officially expired at midnight. The partners failed to inject emergency capital to balance their ledgers. Convert the debt to equity, I ordered, watching the capitalization table pulse on my screen. "Executing the conversion protocol now," Elena stated, a sharp click echoing over the line. The digital ledger updated in real time. The regional bank officially transferred all controlling shares of the prestigious law firm directly into the holding trusts of Vanguard. The names of the senior partners, including Marcus, were systematically struck from the ownership registry. Their equity stakes dissolved into zero values. Vanguard Holdings absorbed 95% of the voting shares, rendering the former partners mere at-will employees stripped of their profit-sharing rights and their executive authority. "Verify the Uniform Commercial Code filings," I directed. Navigating to the state database. "The liens are registered to our holding trust," Elena confirmed. Reviewing the state records, Vanguard now held a perfected security interest in all physical and digital assets belonging to Kensington and Associates. We owned their desks, their servers, and their accounts receivable. "Draft the internal restructuring memorandum," I said, tracing the edge of the trackpad. "Populating the standard takeover template," she noted, pulling up a fresh corporate document. I guided the phrasing of the firm-wide alert. The memo required surgical precision. It announced the immediate acquisition of the firm by Vanguard Holdings to satisfy outstanding commercial debt obligations. It detailed the immediate suspension of all partner distributions. Finally, it introduced the name of the new senior managing partner tasked with overseeing the liquidation of the firm assets. My name. "The directive is finalized," Elena reported, waiting for the execution command. "Dispatch it to their exchange server," I commanded, sitting back in the creaking motel chair. "Transmitting to all personnel inboxes," she replied, executing the digital blast. I opened a secondary window on my terminal, accessing the mobile device management portal for Kensington and Associates. Because Vanguard now owned the corporate infrastructure, we possessed unilateral administrative authority over every piece of hardware assigned to their personnel. That included the expensive smartphone currently resting on a nightstand in a luxury condominium in the Gold Coast neighborhood. I isolated the device identification number assigned to Marcus. The telemetry data flooded my screen. I monitored his exact battery percentage, his network strength, and his global positioning coordinates. "The email reached his device," Elena stated, a soft chime indicating a successful delivery on her end. I watched the ambient light sensor data on his phone spike. The screen activated. The accelerometer registered a sudden shift in orientation. Marcus picked up the phone. He was awake. He was looking at the lock screen. The Vanguard software monitored the read receipt matrix. A green indicator meant the user opened the email, triggering a server ping. A gray indicator meant the user dismissed the notification without accessing the body of the text. I stared at the matrix, my jaw tightening as the seconds ticked past. The indicator flashed gray. He swiped the notification away. In his staggering, unearned arrogance, he assumed the message was just administrative spam regarding the firm's recent frantic attempts to refinance their commercial debt. He saw an internal human resources header and discarded it, prioritizing his upcoming court appearance over a mundane corporate memo. "He dismissed the alert," I murmured, drumming my fingernails against the desk. "He is operating entirely blind," Elena observed, a rare hint of satisfaction creeping into her tone. I monitored his device usage. He opened a drafting application, reviewing his notes for the motion in limine he intended to file against me. I accessed the live feed of his screen. He was preparing to viciously cross-examine a woman he believed was a destitute, disorganized paralegal. He intended to mock my cheap clothes, highlight my frozen checking account, and demand I surrender the $1.2 million Nathan had stolen. He was standing in his marble foyer, adjusting his tailored Italian silk tie in a gilded mirror. He was snapping the brass latches on his expensive leather briefcase, filled with documents designed to ruin my life. He was marching toward his luxury sedan, eager to execute a helpless victim for a $1,000 hourly fee. He had absolutely no idea that he was walking into a federal courtroom preparing to insult the sole owner of his pension, his legal license, and his entire professional future. He is attempting to email his client, Elena noted, tracking a new data packet generating from his device. Marcus drafted a swift message to Nathan, confirming their meeting time at the courthouse plaza. He assured my husband that the default judgment was a mere formality and promised a swift, brutal victory. Lock his outgoing server port, I instructed, my eyes narrowing at the text. Port secured and blocked, she replied, severing his connection to the Exchange server. The message on his screen stalled in the outbox, displaying a spinning loading icon. Marcus would assume he had a poor cellular connection in his parking garage. He would not realize his new employer had just revoked his communication privileges. Access the telemetry on his firm-issued vehicle, I ordered, opening a digital map on my secondary monitor. Pinging the onboard diagnostic system, she confirmed, linking the insurance tracker to our grid. The blue dot representing his luxury sedan exited the Gold Coast parking structure. He merged onto Lakeshore Drive. He drove aggressively, exceeding the speed limit, rushing toward his perceived victory. I watched his speed metrics fluctuate. He was a man in a hurry to dig his own grave. Monitor the security cameras at their downtown office, I directed, shifting my focus to the broader fallout. Accessing the lobby and corridor feeds, Elena stated, routing the video streams to my terminal. I watched the junior associates and paralegals gathering in the hallways, clutching their coffee cups, staring at their phones in shock. The managing partners burst out of their corner offices, demanding answers from an information technology department that no longer held administrative access. The firm imploded in real time, while Marcus cruised down the highway, entirely unaware of the wreckage behind him. Maintain the server locks until noon, I instructed, reaching for the power button on my laptop. Standing by for your signal, Elena said, terminating the secure line. The monitor faded to black. The hum of the cooling fan ceased. The motel room plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant roar of highway traffic filtering through the thin window pane. I unlatched the battery from the laptop, sliding the heavy machine into my canvas tote bag. I stood up from the desk, smoothing the creases from my simple, unbranded navy trousers. I buttoned my plain white blouse, ensuring every seam sat perfectly straight. I draped my gray trench coat over my arm. I did not require a designer suit to project authority. I did not require an expensive leather briefcase to carry my leverage. I turned my attention to the corner of the laminate desk. The single black manila folder rested exactly where I had left it. The thick cardstock contained the toxic bridge loan, the wire fraud metadata, the offshore shell company routing numbers, and the corporate deeds to Kensington and Associates. It contained the physical evidence of every single federal crime my husband and his mistress had committed over the past 14 days. I picked up the folder. The weight of the paper anchored my hand. The smooth surface felt cool against my skin. I walked toward the motel door, my flats making no sound against the worn carpet. I turned the brass deadbolt, pulling the door open to face the freezing morning wind. The Chicago skyline loomed in the distance, a jagged horizon of glass and steel. I stepped out onto the concrete walkway. Pulling the door shut behind me, the latch clicked with a sharp, metallic finality. The isolation of the motel was over. The shadows were gone. The board was set. The pieces were locked into their inevitable positions, and it was time to step into the light. I walked toward my cheap, rented gray Honda, ready to deliver the execution. The drive into the downtown district took exactly 42 minutes. I navigated the congested lanes of the interstate, merging onto the surface streets surrounding the Illinois Superior Court. The concrete plaza stretched out before the monolithic stone building, bustling with a frantic, dense current of pacing clients and attorneys clutching overflowing briefcases. I bypassed the expensive private valet garages. I steered my rented gray Honda into a standard, metered parking space located 2 blocks down the avenue. I cut the engine, the cheap 4-cylinder motor sputtering to a halt. The air inside the cabin cooled within seconds. I picked up the black manila folder from the passenger seat. My fingers pressed flat against the heavy cardstock. I opened the car door and stepped out into the crisp morning wind. My sensible flat struck the cracked pavement. I pulled the lapels of my gray trench coat together, shielding my plain white blouse and unbranded navy trousers from the biting draft. A deafening, guttural engine roar fractured the ambient city noise. The sound echoed off the towering glass facades lining the avenue, forcing pedestrians to pause and turn their heads. A matte black Porsche Panamera tore around the corner, accelerating past the standard parking zones. The driver ignored the painted crosswalks, steering the luxury vehicle directly into the restricted VIP loading zone positioned at the base of the courthouse steps. The tires screeched against the concrete, the wide rims scraping the edge of the yellow curb. I stopped on the sidewalk, maintaining a distance of 50 feet. I did not alter my posture. I watched the heavy driver's side door swing open. Nathan stepped out into the morning sunlight. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, the fabric pulling taut across his shoulders. He adjusted the cuffs of his crisp white shirt, exposing a thick, platinum chronograph watch on his left wrist. He threw his head back, laughing at something said from inside the cabin. He projected the manufactured aura of an untouchable billionaire, soaking in the stares of the passing legal clerks. The passenger door clicked open. Chloe emerged, sliding her long legs out of the low chassis. She wore a fitted beige trench coat draped over a black designer dress. Oversized, dark sunglasses obscured the upper half of her face. My gaze bypassed her designer handbag and locked onto the base of her throat. The morning light caught the platinum setting resting heavily against her collarbone. My grandmother's vintage teardrop diamond necklace rested precisely where it had been the day prior on the yacht. Nathan had not requested she return the stolen federal asset. He paraded his mistress into a state courthouse wearing a physical piece of wire fraud. Nathan rounded the hood of the Porsche, wrapping a possessive arm around Chloe's waist. He leaned close to her ear, murmuring a low phrase. Nathan lifted his chin, his eyes scanning the plaza. His gaze swept over the crowd and landed squarely on my gray trench coat. The laughter died on his lips for a fraction of a second, replaced by a rigid, evaluating stare. He took in the sight of my rented Honda parked down the block, my lack of legal counsel, and the single folder clutched against my ribs. The evaluating stare melted into a broad, condescending smirk. He shook his head, a slow, exaggerated motion designed to project deep, theatrical pity. "She actually showed up," Nathan remarked, his voice carrying over the plaza noise. Chloe lowered her oversized sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. She peered over the dark rims, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my plain attire. She tilted her head toward Nathan, her red lips curving into a sharp, cruel pout. "Wearing the same coat from the cafe," Chloe whispered, her pitch high and mocking. She let out a sharp, piercing giggle, pressing her face into Nathan's shoulder to muffle the sound. Nathan patted her hip, his chest inflating, projecting an aura of dominance. He believed his psychological warfare had reached its zenith. He believed he had successfully reduced his wife to a destitute, trembling shell, dragging herself to the courthouse to beg for scraps. I did not glare at them. I did not quicken my pace to rush past their mocking stares. I maintained my grip on the black manila folder, keeping my breathing regulated to a slow, steady rhythm. A sleek, silver sedan pulled into the loading zone directly behind the Porsche. The rear door opened, and Marcus stepped onto the pavement. The senior equity partner wore a three-piece Italian suit, his silver hair slicked back with heavy pomade. He held a thick, leather-bound briefcase in his right hand. Marcus walked toward Nathan and Chloe, checking his gold pocket watch. He did not look at his phone. He had not seen the internal restructuring memorandum Elena blasted to his Exchange server. He remained oblivious to the hostile takeover of Kensington and Associates. "Right on time," Marcus announced, offering Nathan a firm handshake. "Ready to finalize the surrender?" Nathan asked, clapping the lawyer on the shoulder. "It will take 10 minutes," Marcus replied. his tone sharp with unearned swagger. Marcus turned his head, spotting me standing on the pavement. He offered a tight, patronizing smile. He raised his hand, gesturing toward the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. "Do not dawdle. Ruby," Marcus instructed, waving his fingers dismissively. "The docket is very strict today," he added, adjusting his silk tie. I did not respond to his bait. I turned my head, locking my eyes onto the grand entrance of the Superior Court. I lifted my right foot, bringing my sensible leather flat down against the concrete. I stepped forward, initiating a slow, deliberate, perfectly measured walk toward the monolithic building. Nathan, Chloe, and Marcus turned their backs to me, marching up the wide stone steps as a unified front. They walked with the heavy, entitled strides of predators anticipating a bloodless kill. They conversed in low, arrogant tones, discussing lunch reservations and luxury car modifications. I trailed 30 feet behind them. The crisp wind caught the loose fabric of my trench coat. My thumb traced the edge of the color-coded tabs protruding from the manila folder. Nathan leaned into Chloe, murmuring another joke. Her sharp giggle echoed off the marble pillars flanking the entrance. They thought my silence was the ultimate manifestation of my defeat. They assumed my lack of a defense attorney meant I lacked the resources to fight back. They perceived my unbranded clothing as a white flag of surrender. They did not know that my silence was simply the calm before a catastrophic, world-ending storm. I approached the security checkpoint located just inside the glass doors. The metal detectors buzzed rhythmically, processing the influx of morning litigants. Nathan and his entourage bypassed the standard queue. Marcus flashed his prestigious Bar Association credentials, ushering his client and the mistress through the expedited attorney lane. I joined the standard civilian line. I placed my canvas tote bag and the black manila folder onto the gray plastic tray. The folder slid through the X-ray machine. The security guard stared at the monitor, seeing nothing but dense paper. He did not see the $5 million toxic bridge loan. He did not see the metadata tracking a $250,000 wire fraud. He did not see the corporate deed to Marcus's law firm. I collected my items from the metal rollers. I slipped my trench coat back over my shoulders, smoothing the collar. I checked the digital display mounted above the central directory. The final ruling for my expedited default judgment was assigned to Courtroom 4B. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the Superior Court. The marble floors clicked under the heels of rushing clerks. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. The tension radiating from the adjacent waiting areas was palpable, filled with weeping spouses and frantic defense attorneys whispering last-minute strategies. I did not whisper. I did not require a last-minute strategy. The trap was sprung at midnight. The execution was merely a formality. I rounded the corner of the fourth floor. The heavy mahogany double doors of Courtroom 4B loomed at the end of the long hallway. Nathan stood outside the entrance, leaning against the polished wood paneling. He held a paper cup of coffee, speaking animatedly to Marcus. Chloe stood beside him, reapplying a coat of vibrant red lipstick using the reflection of her smartphone screen. They spotted my approach. The conversation halted. Nathan took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes tracking my steady advance. He lowered the cup, a cruel sneer twisting his features. "I honestly thought you would run," Nathan stated, tossing the paper cup into a nearby bin. "You are incredibly stubborn, Ruby," he added, shaking his head. I stopped 10 feet away from the mahogany doors. My gaze bypassed his face and settled on Marcus. The senior partner unlatched his leather briefcase, pulling a thick stack of printed surrender forms from the interior. "Sign these now," Marcus commanded, thrusting a silver pen toward my chest. "The judge will appreciate the efficiency," he noted, tapping the signature line. I did not reach for the pen. I kept my hands firmly wrapped around the black manila folder. The tendons in my wrists strained against the heavy cardstock. I looked at the silver pen, then shifted my eyes to Marcus's face. "I prefer to address the bench," I replied, my voice holding a flat, hollow pitch. Marcus scoffed, letting his hand drop. He shoved the silver pen back into the breast pocket of his Italian suit. "You are wasting my billable hours," Marcus warned, his jaw ticking, the muscles flexing beneath his skin. "You cannot afford to irritate the judge," he threatened, stepping closer to my space. "I understand the cost of this time," I answered, maintaining my rigid posture. Chloe rolled her eyes, snapping her smartphone shut. The sharp clack of the plastic echoed in the hallway. "Let her humiliate herself, Marcus," Chloe sneered, adjusting the stolen diamonds on her neck. "She needs to hear the judge say it," she concluded, linking her arm through Nathan's. The heavy mahogany doors clicked open from the inside. A uniformed bailiff stepped into the threshold, holding a printed clipboard. He scanned the hallway, his eyes settling on our tense cluster. "Docket number 804, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing down the marble corridor. "Plaintiff and defense, step inside," he instructed, holding the heavy door ajar. Nathan offered me a mock, sweeping bow. He extended his hand toward the open doorway, inviting me to walk into my own slaughter. He projected the supreme confidence of a man who held all the winning cards. I adjusted my grip on the manila folder. I stepped past his outstretched arm, crossing the threshold into the quiet, imposing cavern of the courtroom. The air inside was stifling, heavy with the scent of aged wood polish and leather bindings. The spectator benches were empty. The space belonged to us. The final stage was set. The board was locked. I walked down the center aisle, moving toward the plaintiff's desk, ready to shatter their reality. I pushed through the low wooden gate separating the public gallery from the active legal arena. The brass hinges groaned, emitting a low, metallic scrape that echoed off the towering marble walls. The courtroom of the Illinois Superior Court was engineered to intimidate. Thick fluted stone pillars lined the perimeter, stretching up toward a vaulted ceiling paneled in dark oak and lined with recessed lighting. A heavy mahogany bench loomed at the far end of the room, flanked by two towering state and federal flags hanging motionless in the stagnant air. I approached the plaintiff's desk. The dark wood surface was polished to a high mirror sheen, reflecting the cold, sterile light from above. I stood alone. I placed the black manila folder onto the exact center of the desk, keeping my hands folded neatly over the thick cardstock cover. I kept my feet planted shoulder-width apart on the carpeted floor, anchoring my posture against the immense pressure of the room. 10 feet away, across the dividing center aisle, the defense table buzzed with manufactured, arrogant confidence. Marcus dropped his heavy leather briefcase onto the wood with a loud thud. The brass latches clicked sharply as he snapped them open, reaching inside to pull out thick stacks of legal parchment. He arranged the expedited surrender forms into precise, intimidating columns, aligning the edges with quick, sharp taps against the table. Nathan pulled out a heavy leather chair, sitting down with a deep, dramatic exhale. He adjusted the lapels of his custom-tailored charcoal suit, picking invisible lint from his right sleeve. He crossed his legs, his polished leather shoe resting near the aisle. Chloe took the seat directly behind him in the first row of the gallery, leaning her forearms over the low wooden divider separating the observers from the litigants. Chloe whispered a sharp, hissing remark into Nathan's ear. She raised her manicured hand, adjusting the platinum teardrop setting of my grandmother's vintage diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The gems caught the overhead light, flashing brilliantly against her dark dress. Nathan tilted his head back, letting out a harsh, echoing laugh that bounced off the wooden pews. He turned his gaze toward my solitary figure. His eyes scanned the empty chairs flanking my position. He tapped his knuckles against the defense table, establishing a slow, rhythmic drumming sound designed to fray my nerves. Marcus stood up, grasping the lapels of his three-piece Italian suit. He buttoned the center fastening, smoothing the fabric down his chest. The scent of his heavy, imported cologne drifted across the aisle, masking the stale scent of wood polish and old paper. He looked up at the elevated, empty judge's bench. He checked his gold pocket watch, snapping the lid shut with a sharp metallic click. The clerk indicated a slight delay, Marcus announced, projecting his voice to fill the cavernous space. He turned his head, pivoting his broad shoulders to face my desk. His eyes narrowed, assessing my unbranded navy trousers, my simple white blouse, and my single black folder. A cold, condescending sneer pulled at the corners of his mouth. "Let the court record reflect the plaintiff arrived unrepresented," Marcus declared, waving a hand toward the empty wooden chairs beside me. He stepped out from behind the defense table, holding a silver fountain pen in his right hand. He walked the 10 feet separating our stations. His leather shoes clicked against the marble tiles, establishing a heavy, deliberate cadence. He stopped inches from the edge of my mahogany desk. He leaned forward, bracing his left hand against the wood, invading my physical space. He attempted to tower over my frame, weaponizing his height. "You failed to secure legal counsel, Ruby," Marcus stated, lowering his chin. I maintained my posture, keeping my spine perfectly rigid. I did not blink, holding his aggressive stare without flinching. I noted the faint sheen of sweat gathering near his hairline. He was a man drowning in commercial debt, masking his impending ruin with loud, false bravado. "This display is genuinely pathetic," he noted, tapping the silver pen against my desk. Marcus pulled a pristine, white document from his breast pocket. He slid the paper across the mahogany surface, stopping the pages just inches from my folder. It was the finalized surrender mandate, demanding the forfeiture of the $1.2 million and stipulating the $5,000 relocation fee. "Sign the surrender documents right now," Marcus instructed, pressing the pen onto the paper. I looked down at the silver casing, then shifted my eyes back to his face. I did not reach for the pen. I kept my hands resting flat on the manila folder. My breathing remained slow and controlled. "I will force you to pay my hourly rate," he threatened, his jaw ticking rapidly. "I do not waste the court's time," I replied, my voice holding a steady, hollow pitch. Marcus scoffed, shaking his head in mock disbelief. He pulled his hand back, leaving the document and the pen resting on my desk as a final ultimatum. He turned on his heel, walking back to his client. He dropped heavily into his chair, pulling a fresh legal pad from his briefcase. Nathan leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He stretched his legs out, crossing his ankles beneath the table. He flashed a smug, victorious grin, revealing straight, white teeth. He looked at the silver pen resting on my desk, then met my eyes, savoring what he believed was my total submission. "You simply cannot afford a seat at this table, Ruby," Nathan mocked, repeating the exact phrase he used the morning he stole my money. My pulse held a steady, even rhythm of 60 beats per minute. I did not flinch. I did not issue a defensive rebuttal regarding my fabricated paralegal salary. I placed my right hand on the cover of the black manila folder. I lifted the cardstock, folding it back to reveal the precise, color-coded tabs nested inside. I arranged the documents on the polished mahogany. I slid the toxic bridge loan contract featuring his digital signature to the top of the stack. The ink detailed the cross-collateralization clause that had stripped him of his startup, his offshore trusts, and our marital estate at midnight. He sat there, mocking my financial status, entirely unaware he possessed a negative net worth. I placed the forensic metadata tracing Chloe's wire fraud directly beneath the loan. The timestamp and geolocation coordinates proved her physical presence on the yacht during a corporate blackout period. She sat 10 feet away, wearing the stolen federal asset around her neck, giggling into Nathan's ear, blissfully ignorant of her impending federal indictment. I positioned the corporate acquisition deeds for Kensington and Associates on the right side of the desk. The state registry documents bore the official transfer of Marcus's operational credit lines, his commercial leases, and his equity shares directly to Vanguard Holdings. He scribbled notes on his legal pad, preparing to bill a client for a law firm he no longer owned. I stood in a profound, terrifying silence. The quiet stretched across the courtroom, 10 seconds passed. 20 seconds. The rhythmic drumming of Nathan's knuckles against his desk slowed, then ceased entirely. The smug grin on his face faltered, the corners of his mouth dipping a fraction of an inch. He uncrossed his arms, leaning forward slightly, his eyes tracking the precise, deliberate way I aligned the edges of my documents. Marcus frowned, his pen scratching loudly against his legal pad. The silence magnified the sound, making the scratching seem frantic and erratic. Chloe shifted in her seat, the wooden pew creaking under her weight. She stopped twisting a strand of blonde hair around her finger. She lowered her hand to her lap, her posture stiffening as the tension altered the atmosphere in the room. They expected me to weep. They expected me to tremble, to beg for an extension, or to frantically sign the surrender forms to escape the pressure. My lack of movement unnerved them. The void of sound created a suffocating vacuum in the room. I traced the edge of the bridge loan contract, feeling the warm, laser-printed ink beneath my thumb. I offered them no emotional reaction, projecting a cold, impenetrable wall of calculation. The heavy wooden doors located directly behind the elevated bench clicked open. The brass handle turned with a sharp, echoing snap that cut through the silence. A uniformed bailiff stepped through the threshold, holding a printed clipboard against his chest. He moved to the side, taking his designated position near the wooden witness stand. He struck a wooden gavel against a sounding block, the sharp, single crack slicing through the heavy tension in the room. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice booming through the quiet cavern. Nathan scrambled to his feet, pulling down the hem of his suit jacket. Marcus snapped to attention, straightening his spine and pushing his chair back. Chloe stood up in the gallery, clutching her designer handbag against her stomach. I remained standing exactly where I was, my hands resting flat on either side of my color-coded documents. "The Honorable Judge Elias Thorne presiding," the bailiff declared. Stepping back into the shadows of the paneling, the black robe of the judge appeared in the doorway. He walked up the short wooden stairs, taking his seat in the high-backed leather chair overlooking the courtroom. The climax of a 14-day war was ready to commence. Judge Elias Thorne settled into the high-backed leather chair, the thick material groaning under his weight. He adjusted the heavy black folds of his judicial robe, pulling the sleeves up his forearms. He reached into the breast pocket of his crisp white shirt, withdrawing a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses. He unfolded the hinges with a deliberate, practiced motion and slid the frames down the bridge of his nose. The bailiff issued a sharp hand gesture, instructing the gallery and the litigants to be seated. Nathan dropped into his designated chair at the defense table, letting out a loud, exaggerated exhale designed to project supreme boredom. He crossed his left ankle over his right knee, leaning back to expose the platinum chronograph watch wrapping his wrist. Marcus unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, taking a seat directly beside his client. He pulled a yellow legal pad from his briefcase, arranging his silver fountain pen precisely parallel to the binding. Behind them, Chloe lowered herself into the front row of the wooden spectator pews. She crossed her long legs, the fabric of her black designer dress rustling in the quiet cavern of the courtroom. She tapped her manicured fingernails against the smooth wood of the divider, establishing a faint, erratic rhythm. I did not sit down. I remained standing at the plaintiff's desk, my feet anchored to the carpet, my hands resting flat on either side of the black manila folder. Judge Thorne lowered his gaze to the printed docket sheet resting on the elevated mahogany bench. His eyes scanned the introductory paragraphs of the expedited default motion. His jaw remained slack, his posture reflecting the deep, bureaucratic fatigue of a man expecting to preside over a mundane, predictable domestic asset dispute. He expected a weeping spouse, an aggressive defense attorney, and a routine division of a depleted checking account. He lifted his chin, peering over the top rims of his wire glasses. His gaze drifted across the center aisle, pausing briefly on the defense table. He registered Marcus's expensive Italian suit and Nathan's arrogant, lounging posture. The judge shifted his eyes to the right, sweeping across the empty wooden chairs flanking my position. His gaze finally settled on my face. The bureaucratic fatigue evaporated from his features in a single, microscopic fraction of a second. The slack muscles in his jaw tightened, locking his mouth into a rigid, horizontal line. He sat perfectly upright, his spine snapping straight against the leather backing of his chair. He reached up, grasping the wire frames of his glasses, and slowly pulled them off his face. He set the eyewear onto the bench, never breaking eye contact with me. A look of profound, rigid respect washed over his weathered face. Judge Elias Thorne recognized me. 3 years prior, I stood at this exact mahogany desk, representing Vanguard Holdings in a massive federal liquidation. I had systematically dismantled a corrupt regional supply chain conglomerate while he signed the asset seizure warrants. He understood the sheer catastrophic gravity of a Vanguard executive appearing in his courtroom. He knew my face, and he knew that my presence guaranteed a financial slaughter. Marcus did not read the room. The senior equity partner interpreted the judge's silence as a cue to initiate his billing hours. Marcus stood up, pushing his heavy leather chair back with the backs of his knees. He grabbed the lapels of his three-piece suit, puffing out his chest to maximize his physical presence. He projected the deep, booming voice he utilized to intimidate unrepresented litigants. Your Honor, the plaintiff is a disorganized freelance paralegal attempting to extort my client, Marcus stated, gesturing a hand toward my plain navy trousers. He picked up the finalized surrender documents from his desk, holding the thick stack of premium parchment in the air for the court to see. We demand an immediate default judgment, he added, adjusting his silk tie with a sharp tug. I did not turn my head to look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Judge Thorne. I watched the magistrate process the staggering, suicidal arrogance radiating from the defense table. Judge Thorne raised a single, flat hand in the air. The gesture was small, but it carried the absolute, unyielding authority of the court. The movement silenced the senior equity partner instantly. Marcus stopped mid-breath, his mouth hanging open, the final syllables of his prepared speech dying in the back of his throat. He slowly lowered the stack of surrender documents back to the desk, his brow furrowing in deep, sudden confusion. The judge did not look at the paperwork. He did not address the motion. He turned a deadpan, terrifying glare directly toward the defense table, his eyes boring into the senior partner. Counselor, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a lethal octave. The low pitch echoed off the fluted stone pillars, reverberating through the silent gallery. The sound forced Chloe to stop tapping her fingernails against the wooden pew. Nathan uncrossed his legs, dropping his foot to the floor, the sole of his expensive shoe squeaking against the polished tile. Judge Thorne leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the elevated bench. He interlaced his fingers, staring down at the arrogant attorney. Do you seriously not recognize her? Thorne asked, narrowing his eyes behind the bench. Marcus froze. The confident, booming posture melted out of his spine. His shoulders dropped, the tailored fabric of his suit suddenly appearing loose and ill-fitting. He turned his head slowly, his neck moving in stiff, mechanical increments until he was facing my desk. He stared at my unbranded white blouse, my simple hair, and the single black manila folder resting under my hands. Recognize who? Your Honor, Marcus whispered, his throat visibly swallowing. The judge reached out, pressing his index finger against the microphone mounted to the bench. That woman is Ruby Vanguard, Thorne declared, pointing a thick finger toward my desk. The name dropped into the center aisle like a concrete block. The syllables carried the weight of $1 billion private equity empire, shattering the fragile delusion Marcus had constructed. The senior managing partner of Vanguard Holdings, he continued, his voice ringing through the speakers. Nathan's smug, victorious grin vanished, his lips parted, drawing in a sharp, shallow gasp of air. He gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles turning stark white against the dark wood. He stared at me, his pupils dilating rapidly as his brain struggled to reconcile the destitute, helpless wife he had locked out of a house with the financial titan standing 10 feet away. "The firm that finalized the hostile takeover of your law firm this morning," Thorne clarified, tapping his knuckles against the wood. Marcus physically staggered backward. His expensive leather shoes slipped against the polished floor. Struggling for traction, he released his grip on the surrender documents, the papers scattering across the defense table. He brought his right hand up to his chest, clutching the fabric of his Italian suit over his heart. All the blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. The prestigious career he had spent 2 decades building evaporated into dust in front of his eyes. "She is your boss," Thorne concluded, leaning back into his high-backed chair. The courtroom plunged into a suffocating, heavy vacuum. The ambient noise of the building ceased to exist. Nathan went incredibly pale. The color drained from his lips. His chest began to heave in rapid, erratic jerks. He looked at the silver pen resting near his legal pad, then looked at the black manila folder resting under my hands. He remembered the $5 million bridge loan he signed from Apex Capital. He remembered the toxic cross-collateralization clause tying the debt to his startup and his personal assets. He finally realized the shadow investors he thought he had outsmarted were operating directly under my command. He realized I owned his startup. I owned his bank accounts. I owned the estate he had stolen from me. The penniless wife he had been mocking controlled the private equity empire currently liquidating his entire existence. Chloe shrank back into the wooden pew. Her oversized designer sunglasses slid down the bridge of her nose. Her manicured fingers flew to her throat, clutching the vintage teardrop diamond necklace as if the platinum setting had suddenly ignited. She stared at the back of Nathan's head, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated horror. The wealthy tech CEO she had tethered herself to was mathematically worthless. Marcus dropped into his leather chair, the breath rushing out of his lungs in a hollow wheeze. He stared blankly at the scattered surrender documents, his mind breaking under the weight of his own fatal miscalculation. He had written a threatening, $1,000-an-hour letter to the woman holding the deed to his operational credit lines. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, maintaining my icy, calculating focus. I lifted my right hand, folding back the heavy cardstock cover of the black manila folder. The color-coded tabs gleamed under the recessed lighting. The trap was sprung. The foundation was shattered. The execution was ready to commence. The suffocating silence in the courtroom was broken only by Nathan's shallow, panicked, gasping. I picked up the first document from my black manila folder. The crisp paper rustled slightly, the noise magnifying in the cavernous space. "Your Honor," I stated, my voice echoing with glacial authority. "My husband did not just steal marital assets. He committed federal wire fraud to fund Nexus Logistics, a company Vanguard Holdings legally seized at midnight due to his defaulted toxic debt. I now own his startup, his offshore accounts, and the marital estate." Nathan collapsed back into his chair, clutching his chest as his entire reality was vaporized. His spine bowed, his shoulders folding inward as if struck by a physical blow. His fingers dug into the fabric of his tailored charcoal suit. The smug tech billionaire ceased to exist, replaced instantly by a destitute, broke federal suspect. I turned my gaze to Chloe, who was frantically clutching the stolen diamonds at her neck. She pressed her spine against the wooden pew, her manicured hands trembling against the platinum setting. "Furthermore," I continued, keeping my pitch perfectly level, "the vice president of marketing is currently wearing stolen property tied to a fraudulent insurance claim, and I have time-stamped physical evidence of her insider trading." Chloe shrieked. It was a high, piercing sound of pure, unadulterated terror. 2 court bailiffs immediately stepped forward to detain her, their heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. They flanked the wooden pew, grabbing her by the elbows and hoisting her out of the gallery. The stolen diamonds caught the light one final time before the officers marched her toward the holding cells. Finally, I looked at Marcus, who was trembling so violently he had to grip the table to stand. His knuckles protruded stark white against his pallid skin. The heavy wooden defense table vibrated against the floorboards. "And as the new owner of Kensington and Associates," I said, meeting his terrified stare, "Marcus, you are officially fired." I closed the black folder. The thick cardstock slapped against the mahogany desk with a sharp, echoing snap. Silence isn't a sign of weakness. It is a loaded weapon. Judge Thorne struck his wooden gavel against the sounding block. He did not grant a default judgment for the defense. Instead, he signed emergency asset freezing orders and issued immediate bench warrants for federal wire fraud and grand larceny. Marcus, stripped of his legal standing and his employment, dropped his silver fountain pen. The expensive metal rolled off the table, clattering onto the floor. Court security escorted the former senior partner out of the double mahogany doors. He walked with a heavy, dragging limp, leaving his client entirely abandoned to face the federal authorities alone. 6 months later, the freezing Chicago winter surrendered to a bright, crisp spring. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my executive boardroom at Vanguard Holdings, holding a ceramic cup of black coffee. The sprawling city skyline glittered under the morning sun, a vast network of concrete and steel operating precisely the way I commanded. I took a slow sip, feeling the warm ceramic heat my palms. The federal justice system processed the debris of my former marriage with ruthless efficiency. The undeniable, meticulously cataloged evidence I provided left the defense attorneys with absolutely zero leverage. Nathan accepted a blind plea deal to avoid a prolonged, humiliating trial. He received a sentence of 72 months in a medium-security federal correctional institution. He traded his custom-tailored suits and matte black Porsche for a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit and a highly supervised hour in the prison recreation yard. Vanguard Holdings liquidated Nexus Logistics entirely, selling the proprietary routing code to his biggest market rival for pennies on the dollar. Chloe fared no better. The physical evidence of her insider trading, combined with the possession of stolen federal assets, resulted in a 36-month sentence at a minimum security federal camp. The insurance underwriter seized her designer clothing and her luxury handbags to offset the restitution mandates. Marcus lost everything. His toxic commercial debt completely absorbed his personal pension. The Illinois Bar Association revoked his license following a swift ethics investigation into his firm's catastrophic mismanagement. The last I heard, the once fearsome bulldog of the courtroom was working as an hourly legal consultant operating out of a strip mall in the deep suburbs. I sold the sprawling stone estate. I did not keep a single cent of the profits. I routed the entirety of the liquidated capital into a philanthropic trust designed to fund legal defense teams for women escaping financial abuse. I reclaimed my grandmother's vintage diamond necklace from the federal evidence locker, placing it securely inside a reinforced, climate-controlled vault that I alone possessed the keys to open. My breathing remained deep and steady. My mind was sharp, unburdened, and entirely at peace. When narcissistic individuals attempt to suppress your potential, they often rely on the assumption that your silence equates to surrender. They mistake your quiet observation for ignorance, projecting their own arrogance onto your restraint. But true power does not reside in loud arguments or desperate, chaotic defense. True power requires patience, meticulous calculation, and the absolute refusal to accept a lesser version of your own life. You are the architect of your own boundaries. When someone attempts to lock you out of your own house, you do not sit on the porch and weep. You acquire the bank that holds their mortgage. A crumbling foundation always looks perfect from the outside, but it only takes one calculated strike to bring the entire structure crashing to the ground. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship or set a boundary that completely changed the trajectory of your life? I would love to hear how you reclaimed your independence. Please share your experiences in the comments section below. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of ultimate justice and survival. Always remember your true worth, and never be afraid to let your silence speak volumes.